Welcome to GitKon. We're happy you're here. Right now, you are joining thousands of software developers around the world who are looking to take their skills and craft to the next level, and GitKon will deliver. Over the next 3 days, GitKon will be streaming live on YouTube, X, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We have over 8 hours of total programming for you, and every single minute of it is designed to help make you and your teams more productive and more collaborative. Check GitKon.com at any time for the full schedule and to see all of our amazing speakers. We're going to be giving away some amazing prizes over the next 3 days, including games, tech, GitKon swag, and signed items from our special guest, Astin, star of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. If you want a chance to win, be sure to register, and you can do that at GitKon.com. And all of our content will be available on demand after the event ends. We're excited to kick off day 1 with an amazing tech leader and visionary, Dharmesh Shah, the co-founder and CTO of HubSpot. Also today, don't miss our special session on mental health in the workplace with our guest speaker, actor and mental health advocate, Astin. And tomorrow we'll kick off another amazing keynote, Justin Cormack, CTO of Docker. But first, we want to give you an idea of the kinds of people you'll be hearing from and the kinds of conversations we've got in store to make this event worth your time. I'm excited to introduce Jason Gates, a developer from Sandia National Laboratories. Hi, Jason. Welcome to GitKon. How are you doing?
Hey, Jonathan. Glad to be here.
And we're glad to have you. Jason, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So let's see. A brief introduction to myself is once upon a time, I was an engineering physicist, simulating things like magnetically confined high-temperature plasmas. That's actually how I got connected to Sandia, but that's a longer story. While I was doing that work, I realized I was more interested in the applied math running behind the scenes. And as I was working in applied math, I realized all the problems are actually in the software. So I switched over to software engineering. And then after doing that for a time at Northrop Grumman and then coming down to Sandia, started seeing, well, actually, it's not that the problems are in how we write the algorithms necessarily, but more in kind of how we collaborate as, individuals into a team to write the software together, and kind of the policies and practices that either make us really efficient and productive or perhaps get in the way of that. So I don't know what title you would apply to me now, but say I care about software engineering best practices and helping people to use those to make their lives more joyful as they do their work.
Making work more joyful. Thank you so much, Jason. I think we can leave it at that. I'll let you go for now, and I'm looking forward to our talk later in GitKon. All right, it's time for today's keynote. Dharmesh Shah is co-founder and CTO of HubSpot, one of the world's most popular customer platforms and most recognized tech brands. He and his co-founder, Brian Halligan, literally wrote the book on inbound marketing. In 2013, Dharmesh published HubSpot's Culture Code, which has garnered over 5 million views, the majority of which came during a time when the concept of going viral didn't even exist. He is also the founder of OnStartups.com, a startup blog and community with over 700,000 members. Prior to HubSpot, Dharmesh was founder and CEO of Pyramid Digital Solutions, which was acquired by SunGard Data Systems in 2005. He codes almost daily and is an active writer of all things tech. He is a highly sought-after event speaker, and he is a startup investor in over 60 companies. He is joined by our very own GitKraken CEO, Matt Johnston, and let's listen in on this conversation about the future of software.
Welcome, GitKon attendees. My name is Matt Johnston. I am the CEO of GitKraken, and I'm really excited to be joined today by CTO and co-founder of HubSpot, Dharmesh Shah. Dharmesh, thanks for sitting down with us.
Thanks for having me.
I'd love to start just by hearing your origin story. I've known you, by the time I got to know you a bit, you were already at HubSpot, and HubSpot was really starting to build something and starting to take off. But where did you grow up? Where did you study? And then where did your passion for coding and building come from?
I was born in a small town in India. And small town in India is like, it was 50,000 people, but no hospital. And growing up, my high school had exactly 0 computers. Then I went to undergrad engineering school, 1,000 plus students, and I think we had 6 computers across the entire university at the time I was doing undergrad. And the amount of time I spent on any of those 6 computers was exactly 0. I never got to touch a single one because the ratio was so high.
Undergrad?
This is undergrad, engineering school too. This is undergrad. And so it just, it's one of those things, and it's I don't regret that, but it does kind of bug me a little bit because I got a late start, right? And then my kind of falling in love moment with computers and software development happened. I was visiting, from India, visiting my parents who happened to be here in Indiana, and Purdue University had a campus near where my parents were, and people had always told me, it's like, oh, you like mathy stuff, you should check out this computer stuff. That's all I sort of knew,
Right.
And so Purdue had like a summer course on like introduction to computers, which is basically like a DOS operating system class, and an introduction to programming class that summer. And I took both of them, and I remember like sitting down for the first time, just going through the DOS thing. And there was this is the I'm going to date myself, which I'm completely comfortable with because the universe has dated me already, so that's it's not a big deal. But I remember sitting down, I'm like, this makes sense. So there was this kind of DOS operating manual there. That's like the reference manual for all the commands you can type into the operating system. And I read the whole thing back to back, and then it's like, and from that moment, I sort of knew that this is the thing I was like meant to do. It was really that epiphany moment. To the degree that I was just visiting for the summer, visiting my parents. I had planned to go back and finish up my engineering undergrad in India, and didn't go back. Enrolled in computer science undergrad at Purdue, and said, okay, this is what I'm doing. I'm all in, and like hadn't brought any of my stuff, hadn't said goodbye to my friends, didn't do any of that. This is the thing, and so have not looked back. It's been 30 plus years now.
Well, I was just going to ask, what would it, if you had gone back? I was going to say, boy, did you go through withdrawal after getting like your first real exposure and your first real, that's what was meant for me. But you didn't even have to go through withdrawal. You just said, no, that's what's meant for me. And
that's what's meant for me. Yeah. I don't know that I could have stood once I saw the light, so to speak, or saw the opportunity. I didn't even think of it as an opportunity. I just thought of it as this clicks for me, right? It's going to sound cliche, but it's like, falling in love with your kind of, with your partner. It's like, okay, like I sort of knew like early on, like there's something here. So anyway.
Yeah, it just made sense. And
it's
really cool when what you're describing to me, the word that comes to mind is calling, right? Yeah. It's I didn't find a career, I found a calling. Like this is what I was put here to do.
Yep.
Very, very cool. The two things that jump out to me there, one, you mentioned getting a late start. And I think oftentimes, especially, in kind of modern times, always connected, social media, able to compare myself in real time to everyone else. It's easy to say like, well, I got a late start, so why bother? Yeah. And you're living proof and coding proof that's not the case. And the other one is access, right? It'd be really easy to say, like, I didn't have access. I was in undergrad in engineering school and hadn't been able to touch a computer. Yep. So I think those are both really just, valuable and vivid illustrations of like, just because you are starting later than someone else, you don't have the same access as someone else, doesn't mean you can't go create amazing things.
Yeah, I agree. I'm biased, but I agree.
Yeah. Shifting over to HubSpot, was there a moment or a milestone that you kind of said, wow, like this isn't just a startup, we raised funding, but like this is a movement. This is something that really has staying power and impact on small businesses around the world?
some evidence early on that that this could be a thing, right? Because we built, and for those that are not familiar, HubSpot, the company that I founded, now it's been 17 years ago. We started in the marketing software space, and what was interesting there is we actually kicked off this movement this category called inbound marketing that didn't exist at the time, and this was in kind of reaction to what we thought was really crappy marketing that had existed for a long time, which is, hey, I'm going to blast the world with my messages. I'm going to spam them. I'm going to cold call them. I'm going to do all these, not only less than desirable things, but also decreasingly effective. So what was kind of interesting about the HubSpot story is that movement actually sort of grew in parallel, and the product didn't exist, not really, right? So we kind of sparked that idea. It's like, hey, wouldn't it be nicer if marketing was a noble profession? Wouldn't it be nicer if we actually added value to the people we were trying to sell to? And now we take some of these things for granted. We look at the open source community, we look at product-led growth and things like that, which we should talk about. But it's like, how do I add value to the world? And that kind of pulls people in to my company, into my business, and that's where customers will come from. It's just a much better way to market. And so that we had lots of nodding of heads, and this is back when blogging and Web 2.0 and all those things were first happening. And then in terms of like the milestone around the product itself, it kind of grew relatively, I'll say smoothly, kind of oscillated around, right? And every startup has kind of the moments of near death, which we did too. But no kind of standout. It's like, oh, we woke up on a Monday morning and all of a sudden traffic went up 10x, or we got 8 times the customers. That never really happened. There was no kind of defining moments like, oh, here's the point at which we figured out that this is actually, might be a thing.
There's no in every fundraising deck, there's always the hockey stick. There was never that inflection point. It was just kind of the steady progression.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It was funny. Like when we did our early fundraising, we actually refused to kind of draw out that hockey stick because we're like, because I say this a little bit cavalierly, but it's like startup pitch decks, especially the financial projections, are basically works of fiction, right? It's like layers of assumptions upon assumptions upon assumptions that really don't serve any purpose in my mind.
So I am curious, HubSpot is, in addition to having its roots in marketing software, and I have to say, I first started using HubSpot back in 2008. I was a VP of marketing at a company at the time called UTest, and the alternatives were just cumbersome. They felt like they were built for Fortune 500, and even then, just really, really tough. I will also say that GitKraken is a voracious user of HubSpot's entire suite, from sales to support to marketing. So for what it's worth, we run our business on HubSpot.
That's awesome. Thank you.
And Dharmesh is not paying me to say that. He's not going to give me a discount either. But no, it is really a great product for not just small businesses, but growing, scaling businesses up to, frankly, very large companies. HubSpot was always a marketing juggernaut. As you mentioned, we kind of defined and created this category of inbound marketing. In the early days, did that make it more difficult to figure out the features to build in the product? Because marketing's kind of defined this and we have to live up to that. Or was it still just, no, product's going to have, we're listening to customers, we know what we're building. I guess what I'm asking was product direction impacted by being a category creator?
Yeah, the two, they didn't completely overlap, right? So, and this is both made it easier and harder at the same time, which is when you're creating yes, categories like the product category, and that's the thing that, marketers and folks like to talk about. But what we were really doing is creating a movement, right? It was not intended to be a product category. It was a new way to do marketing, which, then, and we made a couple of very deliberate choices when we did that, which is, okay, well, if this is like the new way to do marketing, which we think is right, and we got some validation from the world at large, we intentionally did not trademark the term, right? So we called it inbound marketing, which we made up. And we wanted others to use it. It's like, okay, if this is really going to be a movement, we can't own it. So this is a bit of an open sourcey kind of approach to category creation, which is the way to actually create a category is you can't be sitting out there alone talking about that category. That's not a category, right? And then too many people hug their new categories too tightly, and then when they have competitors, which was definitely the case for us, is that there's like, oh, we have an inbound marketing thing too, and we do this as well. It's like we thought that was great. The more people that adopted that idea, it's like our hope was that the pie would be big enough, the category would be large enough as a result of this, because we thought we were on the side of truth and justice, that everything else would sort of catch up over time, right? That was, yeah.
I remember during one of our first dinners, I actually asked if you and Brian co-founded HubSpot. Correct me if I'm wrong. You met at MIT Business School, and I asked, was there ever like the awkward conversation about, well, who's going to be CEO? And because that's a very natural thing, right? Everyone has pride and an ego, and your answer to me was just like astoundingly self-aware, and it wasn't humble. It was just really self-aware. And you said, no, in fact, the only conversation was, I'm not doing that. Right. And there were a couple of other caveats that you had. Do you want to share those in terms of your responsibilities and being able to focus on being a builder?
Yeah. So we had, and I highly encourage, if you're ever starting a company or you find yourself, there's what I call the kind of ask hard questions meeting that you have with your co-founders, and you go through a series of things. And I actually have my list. It's like, okay, well, and early in the list is like, okay, who's going to be CEO? What are respective roles and titles going to be? Other things around dividing equity, other things around how do decisions get made. We can talk about those things. But on CEO, that was actually a really easy one, which is, and I told Brian, it's like, I don't want to be CEO. I've been CEO before and I suck at it. That's just not my thing. And he's like, great, because I've never been CEO. I want to be CEO. So that was like, okay, no argument, no debate. The second one took a little bit of discussion, which is my second thing was not only, and I actually made it up spur of the moment because this was not in my head going into the meeting. But once I said the words around the CEO thing, I'm like, oh, and also, I don't want to have any direct reports. And he's like, oh, okay. Like, no, I mean like ever. Like in the history of the company, like ever have any direct reports. And then, it's like, okay, Dharmesh, no, I get, no, I like, Brian, I need you to look me in the eye, because there's going to be a day that our VP of engineering quits or something. It's like, okay, well, why don't you just step in as interim VP of engineering, interim, whatever it is, and run this team for a little while until we kind of find a replacement. That we are going to resist the temptation to kind of pull me in those circumstances. I don't ever want to have direct reports, because I don't think it's in the interest of the company, nor in my interest to do that. And I'm a very black and white, not the right term. I think binary decisions have a underrated value to them, right? Analog decisions, like, oh, I'm going to put this on a spectrum of things. It's like, okay, well, we're going to do this. We're going to limit the number or whatever. And then it's like the definition changes. But say, like, I'm going to have 0 direct reports is a very clear binary statement, right? And
a lot of gray area.
No doubt. There's no gray area.
Yeah.
And we've stuck to that. It's been awesome. And there have been times where, it's been tempting, but, and I think that was one of the other kind of very impactful decisions. And not to say that I'm not involved, I'm like 100% in the company, and I just go to where I think I can add value. And if I had not made that decision, I'm a startup-y kind of guy. HubSpot has 7,000 plus employees now worldwide. I would not have lasted, right? Like I would not have been happy at the company because I'm a startup-y guy. Like if I had kind of done the conventional path and had a team of 1,000 people that I was trying to manage, I just don't think that would have worked. So anyway,
it's an awesome example for me of initially self-awareness and being really honest with yourself and with your business partner, with those around you. But you're 17 years into it, and so it's also the discipline to not let it slide. Like you said, well, I'm sure there are plenty of times when, oh, there's a gap. Hey, maybe you could take this, this small group over here and go, run that, manage that. And so the combination of, self-awareness and like you said, kind of having to double click on that and say, no, I'm being literal, and I mean forever, not just to start with or not just for now. And then the discipline to stick with it, I think, is awesome. I think there are probably a lot of software developers who can really relate to and say, wait, I could be, a CTO, I could be a co-founder and not have the mundane one-on-ones and, and performance reviews and the very important responsibilities that often come with, are thought to come with leadership or becoming, that operator. And so I think it's really cool. One of the things that it seems to me that it's enabled you to do within the context of HubSpot is to go find things that you believe are really needle movers and passion areas for you. And, one of them, and I'm going back forever, but HubSpot created something I think originally called Website Grader, and it has become more than just a website grader. But I think you told me that you actually built the prototype on a flight from Boston to San Francisco. It was like, no, I actually hacked together. And I remember being incredibly jealous because I was a CMO at the time, and I was talking to your CMO, Mike Volpe, and he said at the time it was something like, we get 40,000 free inbound leads a month. And I'm just sitting there going, wait, you get 500,000 free leads a year just because this thing? And then I found out that you had just, it wasn't that you hired an agency and it was Dharmesh, kind of had an inkling that this could be interesting, and then just said, I have the capacity to go and actually start putting this together. More recently, I think you've done that sort of thing around the area of chat. And I think it started off as an inkling, an idea, and then it became a passion project. And I remember reading LinkedIn posts from you saying, I've been up at 1 or 2 in the morning just hacking this together. I'll have something that I want to share with you in a couple of weeks. How do you choose your passion projects?
It's a good question. So I tend to scratch my own itch, solve my own problem. So it either has to be 0 degrees removed from me or 1 degree removed. Either someone I really, really care about, someone literally in my family. So in the website grader case, Brian and I were constantly looking at prospective companies' websites and kind of measuring to what degree were they good at marketing, right? Because that would give us a sense for whether they were a good candidate for HubSpot. And so, I would go do a view source and look at the HTML and say, oh, they're using some good meta tags. That means they sort of have some clue as to what SEO is, right? So you have these kind of little kind of visible signals, right? And so then you would go look at their Alexa ranking. You would see if they had a social media presence. There were all these kind of signals you could look for. And then after a few weeks, I'm like, well, this is kind of painful going to kind of 8 different things. I know how to do it, and I can show Brian how to do it. And it's like, it wouldn't take me that long. So the original version of it was just built for the 2 of us, and specifically actually built for Brian. It's like, Brian, stop asking me to do this. Here's a web page. Just type the URL in. It'll tell you things that I would have kind of looked up, and I don't have to go teach you how to go view source HTML and what tags you're looking for. So it kind of grew out of that. We don't have to do
one at a time.
Yeah. And so, most of the things that I'm a tinkerer. So if I find a problem or something that's just annoying me, right? So, the thing I did in between, we'll talk about the chat thing too, because I think it's fun, but I did, it's the first time I've ever developed a game, but I developed a Wordle-like game. I don't know, I know that's been over a year and a half ago now that it was all the craze. But it was just bothering me that there were certain features missing in Wordle, which is you couldn't play with friends, you couldn't have tournaments, you couldn't play across multiple devices because it maintained state on your local browser using local storage. And I'm like, well, that's just stupid. I'm going to go fix those things. And so I went and fixed those things. And now that game called Wordplay, wordplay.com, is crossing 18 million users. There's got a daily active user base of 25 to 30,000. And I haven't written a line of code for it in 6 months now. It's just out there. Something people enjoy. Yeah. So
that's awesome. Beyond writing code, correct me if I'm wrong, I think I remember that, and this is several years ago, that you kind of set out on a mission to define not just HubSpot's present culture, but their aspirational culture. And I believe it's called the Culture Code. Similarly, so it's not just that you pick a technical problem, right? That is a people challenge or a people opportunity. Yep. Just tell me a little bit about that process. Was it kind of similar that I'm scratching my own itch? I just, it's not clear to me what the culture, how we've codified it. And then how did you embark on that? Because it was not a Dharmesh went and wrote out a deck in a weekend. It was this very thorough, collaborative process. And the end result, if you haven't read it, just search for HubSpot Culture Code. Is that the right phrase?
Culturecode.com. Yeah.
It's culturecode.com.
Yeah,
of course it is. It's phenomenal for companies of any stage. But I'm really curious about the process. How do you kind of uncover, I want to work on that, and then think about the process, because it's one of the few instances where it's not about building a product or writing code, is really kind of connecting people.
Yeah, there's a fun story here, and I think it also, I always in the back of my mind as we're having this conversation, I have this little kind of gauge that goes off. It's like, okay, well, this is interesting, but will it be useful to the folks listening right now? So this is going to be both. So trust me.
Nice.
So here's how it went. In the early years of HubSpot, the word culture, when I say early years, like probably the first 5-6 years, the word culture had actually never been used. And I know this because most of our interactions were over email, and I went and did, and I have, we'll talk about this maybe later too. I have, anyway, we'll come back to that. So culture wasn't used. And then my co-founder, CEO Brian, he joined this CEO group of local CEOs, some big names, at the time. And so they would have these quarterly meetings. And he had been to one of, and I always kind of envisioned this as, they're going out into a field somewhere and holding hands and singing CEO songs and, talking about CEO issues, like group therapy for CEOs, which to this day, I'm not sure that's that far from the truth, candidly. But at this particular, there was one meeting where the topic and the theme was culture. And everyone was going around the circle talking about lessons learned on culture, what they're doing about culture. And then when it came to Brian's time, Brian's like, oh, we're still in the very early stages. We're still trying to build a product. We've got customers to sell. That's a thing we aspire to hope to solve like someday.
Right.
And his CEO friends came down him pretty hard. Like, Brian, you don't get it. Like, if you don't get culture right, nothing else you do will matter. It's just a matter of time. So like, culture will define your long-term destiny as a company. Mm-hmm. That's just what it is. So it's not something you put off till later. It's like now. All right. So Brian files that away. And then he and I have one of our co-founder meetings, which is usually 3 to 5 hour dinners involving multiple bottles of wine. And he tells me, he's like, oh, I just had my CEO group meeting. I'm like, awesome. What did you learn? He's like, oh, the topic was culture. Like, great. And he's like, and so he repeats like, it's like, well, Dharmesh, like culture is super important. It defines the company's destiny. Right. I'm like, wow, that sounds highfalutin. And who am I argue? And then the next line is something that will stick with me is, so like, why don't you go do that? And I'm like, I'm not sure what you mean. He's like, culture is like, it's super important. Why don't you go do that? I'm like, Brian, you've like known me for a while now. We've been working together. Of all the people in the company that it's like least qualified to work on culture, you realize I have no direct reports. I'm like, I don't know a lot about culture, but from what little I do know, it involves people. And that's not my thing, it's like, that's not my, like, anyway. So, but I was team sport. I'm like, okay, culture important, got it. So let's figure it out. So I did the first thing, which is like, I'm going to do a survey. And so here's a thought that I had, and this is the engineering, and the engineers in the room will love this. It's like, okay, well, what we're really saying is like, culture, I thought of as like an operating system. It's like, okay, if I could write like a Python program that made all the decisions in the company, that defined like the rules of engagement, right? Like, what would I need to know? It's like writing a function like that would, and so that was the V1 of it was, if I could write a single function that measured the likelihood of success for someone joining HubSpot, what would the coefficients of that function be? We don't know the weights yet. Let's put that aside. What are the things that are correlated? So I went off and did surveys of the existing employees to try and triangulate. Anyway, and so V1 of it was a slide deck. It was 16 slides at the time that answered that question, that answered the who question. It's like, if we could like mathematically come up with a way to kind of measure likelihood of success for an individual, how well this person kind of fit our culture for whatever it is, because the culture was working, the company was doing well. And that's why, by the way, it's called the culture code. Inside story, which is most people, when they see that, there's like, oh, it's a code of conduct or a moral code around how companies should operate and the relationship between employees. No, it was like, if I could write Python code to run the company, here's what it would be. And this makes like the top 3 list of things I've learned. And so from that point forward, kind of the big epiphany I had is that really culture is actually a product. Yeah. And every company actually builds 2 products. They build one product for their customers, and they build another product for their people, for their employees. Yeah. And once you take that frame of mind, so let's just stipulate that maybe that's right. Let's just say, if you kind of pull on that thread, that's like, okay, well, you would never build a product for customers without asking the customers whether it was working for them or not, what the bugs were, feature. It's like, And so we did that. So every quarter, in the same way that we would get product feedback, we would get feedback from the employees who are the customers of the culture and say, oh, like what's working, what's not working. And then we would categorize it. We would talk about it at the all hands meeting. And we took that to the nth degree. So we treated those as bug reports. And there are times where it's like, oh, a lot of you have reported this bug in our culture or whatever, but that kind of works as designed. Like we're not going to fix that, right?
Functions
yes, that's a bug, but it's a lower priority right now because these other things are much more burning issues, and we will solve these, within the next, 3 to 6 months. And that has been one of the most impactful kind of realizations that we had. I'll close this out. So one of the things that HubSpot is most known for outside of kind of inbound marketing and now CRM and customer platforms is our culture. That's the thing. And so that product is quite possibly even better known than our core product, right? It's weird how that's turned out. But if I could give one piece of advice and it doesn't even matter what stage of company you are, is culture super important. Treat it like a product. And if you think of it as a product, the one takeaway would be the mistake most startups will make and most startup founders and founding teams will make is they think their job around culture. It's like, oh no, we think culture is super important. And as long as we can preserve our startup culture, then we have won. That's what success looks like, is preserving our culture, not losing that. And I think that's misguided. And the reason it's misguided is that if you think of culture as a product, in the same way that a product is never done, you iterate on it because the needs of the customers will change over time.
Yep.
A culture is also not done. Now, you can have product philosophies that carry across product portfolios and across decades. You can have core values that are constant, but the actual culture and the way it manifests will likely need to change over time, needs to be iterated on. Anyway, thank you for coming to my TED Talk on culture. But
well, I'm going to extend your analogy. You said, people can report bugs and it might be, that's a high priority bug, or it might be that actually works as intended. I'll extend the analogy. There's also feature requests, right, that come in over time. And I love you calling it a roadmap. We talk about culture in the last couple of years, at least since I joined GitKraken, in the same way that it's a product. It is a living, breathing thing. And if it's not tended to, it can decay, it can erode. And by the way, the culture that we have today won't serve us well 2 years from now, as the company grows, as the portfolio grows, as our responsibilities and opportunities grow. Yes. And so I will echo what you said, thinking of it as a roadmap, thinking of it as this ever-changing, living, breathing thing that requires time and attention. There's debt that needs to be paid down. There's bugs that need to be fixed. There's features and improvements and iterations that you'll go through. And the second that you set it and forget it, it begins to atrophy. And it's just like software. The earlier you catch it, it's easy to keep up. The longer you let it go, the more expensive and painful and harmful it becomes.
Yes.
Awesome. Shifting gears a little bit, we were talking about chat, and the name of the product in HubSpot is ChatSpot. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's ChatSpot.
Okay.
Yeah. ChatSpot is a natural language interface. It's a bot application. So think about ChatGPT, which pretty much everyone has seen and used. If ChatGPT and HubSpot had a baby, right? So it's like a natural language chat interface for marketing and salespeople to do marketing and salesy things, right? Through a natural language interface. And so once again, kind of given the audience on here, I think one of the biggest transformations we are living through right now as software developers and product builders is around, and yes, generative AI is super interesting. And most of the excitement around generative AI is like, oh, I can type a prompt in and get a 1,000-word blog post, or I can create content, and that's super exciting and super fun. I think the future opportunity is not having generative AI generate something for human consumption. It's having it generate things for computer consumption. And so let's dig into this just a little bit. So anyone that's ever built software, every company that's ever built software always says, to varying degrees, like, oh, we build easy, intuitive applications. That's our different, versus the guy from 10 years ago, or whoever it was. And that is fundamentally a lie. And the reason it's a lie, right, is if you just look at that word intuition, it's like, let's say you're sitting in, we'll pick any product of choice, let's say Excel. Most people are familiar. It's like, oh, I want to take all the negative numbers in this Excel file and make them red if they're negative, format them a specific way. Like, you sort of have to have, so you have your thing that you're trying to do with the software in your head, And then you have to go through a very specific set of swipes and clicks and touches and whatever. You have to sort of know the software and know how to do the thing you're trying to do. The thing you're trying to do is very clear in your head. It's like, I want all negative numbers to be read, right? That's the thing. Or I'm trying to build a report in HubSpot that shows me my sales last quarter from Europe, whatever it happens to be. And so that's not intuitive at all, right? It's like we're translating our intent as humans into the language that the software understands in some form of UI as the designers kind of created it. And so now for the first time, literally in human history, and I've tried this, by the way, I've been obsessed with this idea of like, okay, well, if we truly wanted to create intuitive software, we would allow the user just type in what it is they're trying to do, make all the negative numbers red, or create a report of sales in Europe last quarter, and then the software just does that. And now that is actually possible. It literally was not possible. I know this because I have tried multiple times to do this with machine learning technology and natural language processing, both open source and closed source, over the span of at least the last 6 years, if not longer. But now with generative AI, one thing that's kind of misunderstood is these large language models are really good at understanding human language, and that's great. But their output, both what they consume in and what they put out, is basically text. And it just so happens a lot of the training data that we use for LLMs is English corpus knowledge of, reading Wikipedia and the entire internet, all of human knowledge, and building a deep learning network. But it can also do other things, right? Which is generate code, because that's really what we're talking. So what ChatSpot effectively does to say, oh, let the user type in a natural language prompt. Here's what they're trying to do in HubSpot, let's say. Then use that to generate code. So imagine if you had like 1,000 developers at your beck and call, Matt. It's like, oh, here's the thing I want to be done within HubSpot or whatever applications you're using. And they were super fast and they were at your beck and call. They would go write a piece of code, and they were super fast, so it'd be done in like 5 minutes. And then you'd run that code. And that's essentially what ChatSpot is, right? It'll take the natural language query in, generate in our domain-specific language. It'll make the right API calls to HubSpot or wherever it needs to go to pull the data together, reformate the response back in a way that's going to be meaningful to you and say, here's the thing you asked for, right? And across every industry that there is in software right now, this is the big transformation. This is the big opportunity. It's as big as moving from client server to the web when we move to browser-based applications versus things that lived in your client. This is going to be the next thing, in my mind. I mean, it's going to take years. Some industries will move faster than others, but it's a massive opportunity for everyone listening.
You've written a lot about chat as the UI of the future, the interface with software. Do you think that extends across spaces? Is that specific to a certain type of applications, or do you kind of see that like the GUI, the point and click, I have to type things in, starts to be supplanted or even improved upon by chat as the interface?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So I think chat is going to augment user interfaces and user experiences, right? So there's a lot to be said for these kind of natural language chat-based interfaces, and the examples I gave you were somewhat contrived, right? Because they happen to lend themselves well. It's like, oh, it's hard to do it, but it's very easy for me to express it in my head. But there are a class of problems for which a traditional visual UI is actually more meaningful. This is particularly like you're trying to discover something. You're doing, you're trying to kind of find your way through a particular body of knowledge or whatever. There's certain things where the visual interface makes much more sense, because then you can do sort of like a guided. Because the issue with chat is you have the blank canvas syndrome. You don't even know how to formulate the thing you're asking for, right? It's like, whereas UIs have been designed with an onboarding experience in mind that says, oh, when you start, we're going to help you become accustomed with the software, just like games work, business applications, the same thing. Right. And so over time, I think we're going to see a hybrid. We're going to see more and more natural language embedded inside classic UIs. And they will help you do the things because some things will be easier just to express it. But then some things will be easier kind of rendered in a visual UI, or kind of and this is sort of what ChatSpot does with like report building. It's like, oh, you can describe the report you want, but then we're going to put you into the HubSpot report builder to fine tune it. Because then it starts to get annoying trying to type. It's like, okay, well, you're asking me to pick amongst these things, whatever. Like, I don't even know what the choice of options are. Well, we've solved that problem. There are these things called drop-down lists where I can just tell you the constraint and here are the things you should be choosing from. And that's a much better overall experience than trying to force someone to kind of guess at what the actual word is. So English is great for lots of things, or natural language is great for lots of things, but not everything. So I think we're going to move towards this kind of augmentation model, but I think more and more will recognize that these are things that are easier for the user than actually in some ways. A message to the kind of product managers out there and the builders and the founders is that one of the nicest things about on the kind of building side of it of chat UX is around the ability to experiment really quickly. So let's say you have a new feature idea, it's like, oh, here's this idea that occurred to me. And the idea itself is actually not that hard to implement, right? It's like, okay, we get it. But once you have a UI, like an actual UI in the mix, you have to go then design that UI. There's lots of degrees of freedom. It's like, okay, well, what should we ask for? How is this laid out? And now you have a whole other person that has to be involved in that process. With ChatSpot, like we get requests all the time, and that's like product management nirvana, right? It's like I know what people want to do in ChatSpot by virtue of just looking through the logs every night, right? It's like, oh, here are the things and here are the patterns of they want to be able to do this. And that's a reasonable thing to be able to want to do in ChatSpot. We don't do it yet. Let's go do it. But then you can implement it, right? It's like, oh, I don't have to design a UI. I can say, here are the 5 ways someone might express that.
Right.
Then you give them an example inside the app and say, oh, by the way, we support this now. Ask questions like this. And here's a sample prompt of us telling you SEO research or whatever. Here's a way to express that. And people use it like in 24 hours, you can do something that would have taken like weeks, right? If you had to go through the classic design a UI, roll out the UI, figure out whether it's working. How do you solve the discoverability problem? It's like, oh, you just tell them.
Right. You
don't have to worry about gating or anything because it's like, okay, well, if they don't know about the fact that that prompt is even supported, you can just send an email to a small percentage of people and say, oh, by the way, try this prompt, right? Like that's
you don't have to put it behind a preview flag or like an insiders group. I
haven't been this excited since like V1 of the web in the late 90s, right? It's like, this is, really? I went through mobile, as we all did, went through the social thing, and it was good, right? Don't get me wrong. That was awesome. Uber gave us lots of great applications. But this is like a tear in the fabric of the universe level kind of evolution, right? It's not just because it can write a blog post or whatever, just because the primitives that it unlocks are just so profound. It's like, okay, well, and now we're just starting to discover, it's like, okay, well, anything that can be represented in a textual form, these large language models can consume. Music. Like, in Western style classical music, you can represent music as a series of letters with annotations, sharps and flats, and that's it. That's the vocabulary of music. Right. And there's a large body of music, and we've already done this now, right? It's like, oh, I'm going to index every piece of music that ever was. I'm going to classify it into genres. I'm going to then be able to generate music that sounds an awful lot like music that's been, but is actually original, right? And so you would never have thought that a large language model would be able to produce music, but it uses the exact same technology that we use to generate a blog post.
Let's take the conversation around generative AI and bring it into the world and present and future of software development. What type of impact do you think that AI has on software developers and software development as we go forward 1 year, 5 years, 15 years?
Yep. So the impact we're already seeing is around improving developer productivity. So if you're not using a product like GitHub Copilot, and there are other ones out there, you should be. It doesn't matter where in the evolution of whether you've been writing code for 30 years or 3 months, it works. This is not one of those fad facts like, oh, I can't believe that a coding tool, having coded for 30 years, that's ever gonna. It's like, yeah, I'm not writing like simple for loops that are going to sort something, or whatever. That's not what I do. Like, I do much higher falutin stuff than that. It's like, no, it will improve your productivity, period. So that's like thing number one. Then kind of the next step from that, I think the thing we need to be mindful of is that so generative AI is going to change software development in a very fundamental way, and it's a little bit like. And this is sort of the kind of evolution of software development generally, right? We've been increasingly moving towards higher and higher levels of abstraction. We went from machine code to assembly to C to C++ to the interpretive languages, and there's certainly patterns to that. But the most fundamental thing that always seems to get better, and we take half steps back sometimes, but is to allow developers to work at higher levels of abstraction and being closer and closer to the problem versus having to deal with the intricacies of how a particular architecture or a particular language works. And so what I think generative AI is going to open up is a level of abstraction that we've never experienced before, which is, so right now, if you're in GitHub Copilot or something, like you're in your IDE of choice, whatever it happens to be, And you can like leave a comment, I'm writing a function here, the parameters or whatever, and it'll take a pretty good pass at writing out the code for you, and you can review it, and that's all good. In the future, I think where this winds up is that we're going to have like multimodal development, which is we all know about writing functions in whatever language you're writing about, but imagine if like some of the code in your application was actually English. That you don't have to do code generation or anything. You're just like, oh, here's a function that does this, and you just describe the function, and you don't see any code. It's just there. It's like when you use a library, like you look at the API of the library, but you don't really, unless you need to, dig into the internals of like what the implementation is. That's the whole point of having an API or having a layer of abstraction between you. So imagine a layer of abstraction which lets you articulate the thing you're looking to do in your natural language, whatever it happens to be. We'll use English for now. It's the most common one. So I think we're going to see that. And so that's going to be one kind of track of evolution. So we talked about developer productivity. That's going to continue to get better. You should be using it. We're going to see this kind of multimodal environment. The other one, I probably should have put this second, is around, it's going to bring new people into the fold, right? And we've had conversations around like kind of low code, no code for decades, right? And the problem with all of the prior implementations of low code, no code is that they basically just swapped out kind of one manifestation of imperative code for another. It's like, oh, you don't have to write like an if block or a for loop or something like that. We're going to let you do it visually, right? Like, yeah, but I'm still having to think about conditional logic. I have to know what a loop is, and I have to understand scope or whatever it is, right? Yes, maybe it's visual, but it doesn't really take away, like, it's just code in visual form, I guess is what I'm saying. It's not no code, right? It's code in visual form.
It's a different learning
most
curve.
Of those implementations.
It might be a more accessible learning curve, but it's still a learning curve.
Yes.
Right. Whereas,
but now we're getting to the point where certain kinds and classes of applications you actually can do literally with no code, right? Like, okay, if it's a relatively known problem, we're seeing some early examples of this from the LLMs around like building simple games or simple kind of full-fledged but simple applications on the web that exists, and they may not get it right the first time, but it's going to get better. So what's going to happen is we're going to see new people come into the kind of software development arena, which I fundamentally think is actually a good thing for professional developers. And here's why. Because what it does is it kind of raises the impact we as kind of professional developers that have been, let's say, classically trained or empirically trained, it raises kind of the value that we can bring in terms of like, okay, well, the need to kind of understand problems, the need to kind of understand technology and how all this stuff really kind of works is going to be even more important, because we're going to see lots of noise on the lower end because lots of new things, people learning. It's like, okay, that's great.
Right.
But as soon as you get to like anything of scale, it's going to matter in terms of what the maintainability of the code is, or it's going to matter when you decide it's like, oh, we're going to build product number 2 in our portfolio, and how do we then like reuse some of the code from the thing that we didn't actually write? Right. All of that stuff is going to become important. Collaboration is going to be important. These kind of skills around not just being able to, and which has always been important. So it's not just about, in my mind, when you write code, the best developers, right, and this idea is not mine, but the way I'm going to say it is mine, is that the best developers write code not for the computer to kind of run it. Mm-hmm. It's for humans that will come downstream from them later, or your future self. Like, is it easy to understand? So don't write code that's going to be the fastest or uses the least memory footprint. That's the easiest way to kind of move towards obsolescence. Try to say, okay, here's the simplest, most elegant manifestation that's the easiest to understand for others and for me as to how this thing does what it does. And that is an art form. And yes, large language models will likely get better at that too, just in the same way they got better at writing. But that's the skill I think that we should still continue to learn, continue to teach the next generation, is around problem solving, empathy, being close to the customer, close to your teammates, in terms of like very few applications are created like as a single person solo effort, right? And they're usually team efforts.
Dharmesh, thanks so much for taking the time. Really great. I'm sure tens of thousands of developers around the world are going to get to listen in on this conversation and benefit from your learnings and your journey. So I can't thank you enough.
Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thanks, Dharmesh.
Thanks. Best wishes.
Welcome back. And thank you, Dharmesh and Matt, for that insightful conversation. Sean Astin will be here on the stream very soon. But before he joins, we have a couple of DevRel pros who have joined forces to teach you their keys to working more effectively with your fellow developers. Joyce Lin is the Senior Director of Developer Relations at leading API platform Postman, and she is joined by Ron Northcutt, an experienced developer, open source advocate, and problem-solving expert who serves as the head of DevRel at AppSmith. Let's listen in.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the talk on developer collaboration. It's more than just communication. We're going to talk today a little bit about how those two pieces work, and coming from the developer relations space, we've got some interesting ideas that I think are useful. But start off with, my name is Ron Northcutt. I'm the head of DevRel at AppSmith, which is a visual development platform for developers to build the front end for your back end. And I'm joined by...
Hi, I'm Joyce Lin. I work in developer relations at Postman, an API development platform used by a ton of developers. So I'm curious, it seems very suspicious that both of us were asked to do this session on developer collaboration. Perhaps we can speak to a thing or two about it.
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that I found very interesting as we were kind of talking and getting ready for this was the point that you had, which is I think a place I'd like to start on, the difference between how we think about communication versus collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times people use developer communication, or they say developer collaboration when they really mean developer communication, and they're not synonyms. They don't mean the same thing. And, especially with today's distributed systems, or when you're talking about like open source contribution projects, communication is not the same thing as collaboration. So I personally think that communication falls under collaboration, but it's not synonymous. How do you see them relating to each other?
I think that's a really good point. The way that I think about it is the communication piece is kind of more about gathering and sharing ideas, information, getting your requirements. And it's like a continuous cycle, right? Like you're constantly having some type of communication, and that conversation is what enables and powers the collaboration side. And the collaboration side tends to be more organized into things like projects or issues or features or pull requests or initiatives, things you're trying to actually get done. So the collaboration side tends to be more linear, but it's that communication loop that you're talking about that kind of keeps things moving.
Yeah, and also like you're mentioning projects, like you might come together to collaborate for short-term projects or ongoing projects, but the communication, you're talking about like brainstorming or ideating early on. So you might have like a glut of communication before people actually start working and producing things.
Exactly. And it's also different when you're talking about developers, programming, coding. So when you think about this, like for the developer, right? Because that's what we're kind of talking about here, and developer collaboration, how do you see that being a little unique versus other roles or other people in the organization?
I think there's the stereotype. I think we have this in the session description, but the stereotype of the rock star developer getting it done, like a couple of Red Bulls later, and all of a sudden there's this magic piece of code. And more, some AWS is widely known for, emphasizing writing skills. How do you communicate to the PMs, to other potential stakeholders? And I think you'd be far pressed to say like any developer is creating anything in a whole.
I totally agree. Yeah.
And you mentioned this earlier where, we're talking about like within the team, within a company, but especially if you're developing with partners and developing with outside contributors, how do you see collaboration occurring outside of the immediate dev team, outside of the developer team?
Yeah, that's I think super important, especially as we continue to see the rise in open source, which is a passion of mine. It's kind of where I came from, and that's one of those other things I think is so unique about developers, because we do have the way that we work and the tools that we use kind of can help drive that collaboration with, anything from, just having good documentation that somebody left some helpful information and a signpost in the road before you even get there, and it helps you do what you need, all the way to things like, issue queues or projects, Git, obviously, and Git tools that allow you to collaborate and work back and forth, kind of sculpting the code, if you will, with each person kind of adding their piece in, and letting people kind of do that on their own schedule without necessarily knowing how everyone else is going to go. But then that opens up a whole new topic. So what I'm really curious about are your thoughts on the sync versus async. So when we're talking about collaboration, what do you think are some of the best methods for synchronous communication kind of at the same time?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, if I had to give one tip that's just top of mind, just because I'm living this now, is synchronous communication. There's nothing that can be replaced with a good old face-to-face interaction,
Totally
which
agree.
is really tough if you have distributed teams, if there's no opportunity for you and me meeting in person. I guarantee if we went for a walk around the block, had a cup of coffee, there's nothing to be substituted for that.
Totally agree. But then when you do have that, I mean, there's always pros and cons. So when we do have that kind of synchronous communication, whether it's in person, which I totally agree is the best, or it's Zoom like we're doing now, or even like, Slack or whatever. What are some of the things that you think people should watch out for with how to best use those types of collaborations?
Well, besides the face-to-face, other synchronous communication, I feel like there's a word for it. I can't remember. It's like micro, how everyone emojis things?
Mm-hmm.
And you know how you can't tell tone over email or like over a messaging?
Right. It's like that communication that is lost when it's not person to person.
There's a generational difference in emojis that I've learned, but also an etiquette, a business etiquette of how you emoji. So you're not going to be emojiing, or let's just call it any kind of micro communication. Right. Micro communications don't occur in the same way that you would with your friends as you do in an office setting. And because emojis seem so informal, I think that can be just getting to know the community's etiquette. So say you're submitting a code, you're doing a code review. What are you communicating? The literal text, but also the micro communications. And
so kind of like understanding not just the overall way that we can communicate and work together, but also understanding like the more specific nuance of the culture of a community, of an organization, even of not just a team, but even a person, right? Like depending on their experience and how well you work together and how well you know them. Really, really important. Yeah, reading the room.
And I was thinking about this, Ron, just Postman launched a collaboration feature, or like went into collaboration, I want to say like 5 years ago. And when we started thinking collaboration and communication, adding like an ability to talk to each other synchronously. And we found that it was almost more important to really beef up the asynchronous side of things versus the synchronous. And it could be because everyone's distributed working together. It could just be because it's the developer base. But in your mind, what are some of the best methods for asynchronous collaboration?
It's interesting you mentioned that, because there actually was an early version of AppSmith that offered a similar thing, like a live chat thing. And it was discontinued because people weren't using it. There's other tools that they were using for that. But what we did find is that there was more we needed to do to beef up some of those async things, exactly like you're saying. So like the Git integration and things like that. When we kind of broaden the perspective a little bit, I can't say enough about Git and Git related tools that let you do that. But also things like chats, Slack, things like that, where I can post something and somebody will see it when they get to it, or even like, chat bots and things that are going to kind of help organize and orchestrate things for me so I don't have to do all the pieces. That's something we see. And then, of course, like we mentioned earlier, tried and true, issue queues, docs, knowledge base, like all of those things that can be helpful when you're working on your own time and then periodically trying to collaborate with others.
It's funny because a lot of the most popular tools are created by developers for developers, but then they're being adopted by non-developers and other folks because, maybe it's catering to the devs like to be able to just work super efficiently, but be able to toggle stuff off to async when they want to. What are some of the, I guess, pitfalls, would you say, of asynchronous communication methods? I mean, besides overly relying on async communication.
I mean, I think the biggest one that I think of really comes down to one of the biggest problems in software, right? Dependency management, right? So if I have a project and I've got like 5 different things need to happen and they have to happen in series, and that's multiple people that have to work, there's too many places for a bottleneck. So I think one of the best things that we can do collaboratively is to try and figure out how can we be a little bit more loosely coupled. So as much as possible, different pieces can work in more parallel streams so that, I had a project this today. I was just telling you over the weekend, I was finishing up some code, which I don't get to do very often, but it worked out really well because the other developer I was working with was working on their piece. They had all their stuff going. We're using an API connection, which I happen to document in Postman. And then, so I built out my piece. We communicated, we had the plan, we went to our different pieces, we had questions back and forth, we worked on our different pieces. And then when we came back together, everything just lined up perfectly. So I wasn't a bottleneck for them. They weren't a bottleneck for me. And we got the same work done because we were in parallel in half the time. So I think when we're looking at ways to be collaborative asynchronously and be efficient, I think loose coupling is
critical. That's so funny you mentioned that. The Postman CEO, Postman's an API, platform, but the Postman CEO says this about the Postman company, where every team should be treated like an API and you should never be blocking each other. And it's all about the interface. When there's miscommunications or stuff isn't quite right, he likens it to ironing out the interface, setting the expectations and aligning them. He didn't say SLA, but he basically, it's like treating each individual component as an individually decoupled element. So then you're not holding anyone else up.
And I love that too, like talking about that interface, right? So if we have a contract, I know what to expect from you, you know what to expect from me. I know how to relate to you, whether it's through docs, through communication, through emojis, whatever it is, then everything else is streamlined and we know what to expect. That's a really, really good analogy. Okay, so it looks like we're about at time here. So in the last few minutes before the clock runs out, any final thoughts on developer collaboration, communication, how people can work better together?
Yeah, I really enjoyed hearing your perspective of asynchronous versus synchronous collaboration. And I think I personally fall into a danger sometimes of relying too much on asynchronous and neglecting the synchronous, because I will never see you, Ron, in person, or the chances are low, then I just kind of neglect the opportunities for synchronous communication. And then by the same token, when you're talking about like code reviews or gathering product feedback, just having human as well as automated feedback loops. We always think about the efficiency, but what about the qualitative or subjective or the kind of like the informal feedback I want to give you about this thing that you're working on? It's like two sides of the coin. How about you?
No, I agree 100%. In fact, I think that balance is what's so critical. And one of the things I've noticed is that when there seems to be a problem, it tends, to my experience, it tends to be when there is an imbalance. There's lots and lots of communication, lots and lots of ideation, but not a lot of action. Or there's lots of things happening, but there's not enough, alignment beforehand. So things don't fit well together. So finding the balance between, the communication and that human element and sometimes it's not even about work, right? It's just about being human. And then also getting things done and getting them done well. That's, critical.
And I guess one way, I mean, unless you're just like super self-aware and just noticing that imbalance, one way is just to make sure you have both channels open, or you create processes for both right off the bat so that you can quickly switch over into another lane. I don't know. I'd be curious to hear what the people listening to the session suggest.
I am too. And I would love to have a bigger, broader conversation about this at some point. Unfortunately, we're out of time. But I do think, for me at least, coming out of this, the valuable thing was that thinking about communication and collaboration as two separate things that work together, which full props to you, Joyce. That was your genius coming out. So thank you very much. And thanks for taking the time to chat with me. It's really been lovely.
Thank you.
With you.
Thank you, Joyce and Ron, for those smart examples and lessons in teamwork. At GitKraken, we celebrate all the individual devs and solopreneurs. And we're also huge believers in the power of collaboration, whether your team is 2 people strong, 200, or much larger. And of course, having the right software, hardware, and processes in place is critical. But it's important that we don't forget about another pretty important part of the equation. It's a truly amazing piece of software and hardware. It's our own selves, our bodies and minds. At the end of the day, behind the workstation and job titles, we're all people. And we know that to perform our best, we need to feel our best. With that in mind, I am delighted to introduce today's special session, Beyond Code, a conversation on mental health in the workplace, featuring award-winning actor, director, and producer, Sean Astin. Sean is known for his beloved and iconic films, shows, and characters, including Samwise Gamgee from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. You'll enjoy some fun stories from Sean's career in this talk, but you may not know that he is also an outspoken advocate for mental health and wellness, a cause inspired by his own personal experience with his mother's battle with mental illness. Sitting down with Sean for this important conversation is our own director of content, Dave Bohr. I'll turn things over to Dave now, and I hope you find this session meaningful and helpful.
Well, I could not be more excited to be sitting here with the one and only Sean Astin. Sean, I promise that's the only time I'll refer to you in the third person today. I'm a huge movie lover. I'm such an enormous fan of yours, from Goonies to Encino Man, Rudy, Stranger Things, and of course, Lord of the Rings. And we're definitely going to be talking about that today. And we're also going to be announcing a couple of live raffles today, and those folks are going to be getting some great signed items from you, Sean. So that's pretty exciting. But let me just stop and say, welcome, Sean. Thanks so much for being here. And how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Dave. It's great to be here. I feel perfectly at home. I'm excited to talk about my first foray into tech. But it'll dovetail into the subject that I know you're going to bring up. So I'll wait for a minute. So call that a little hyping of my first, the thing that makes me feel like I belong in this room.
Sean, we've also got you here to talk about a really important and very timely issue, which is mental health. And today, specifically, we're going to talk about mental health in the workplace. Why don't you just ask, what is your connection? Why have you become such an advocate for speaking about mental health?
Absolutely. It's as you were saying that, I was thinking about Lord of the Rings, and I was thinking about Samwise Gamgee and the trip to Mordor and the volcano and like getting a ride back on the eagle and, in the clutches of the, I'm thinking, if Samwise Gamgee can't speak to mental health issues, I don't know Yeah, that was a traumatic work experience for him because he was doing his job following Mr. Frodo. But the reason I come at this subject matter is that my mother, who was a famous actress, she passed away in 2016. She was a beloved figure in the American television landscape over the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And she was diagnosed in the mid 80s with a bipolar mood condition. Once she was diagnosed, she became a champion for mental health advocacy, destigmatizing mental health and mental health awareness. And she wrote books, expert books on, Brilliant Madness was one of her books. She gave speeches all over the country, all around the world. She did movies about it. It was quite a harrowing experience growing up as the son of a person with bipolar. And then when Lord of the Rings came out in 2001, I started getting lots of calls from places who thought, like, here's somebody that the audience will relate to who had this family experience. So I meet at the nexus of kind of pop culture, engagement, and to answer your question, that's me. That's how I come at it.
This session may have raised some eyebrows when we announced it. Maybe it's still raising some eyebrows for some skeptics out there. I'll admit, when we even first started throwing around the idea of inviting you to speak at GitKon, beyond the sort of fellowship of code theme, the deeper connection maybe wasn't super obvious, right? An actor coming to talk about mental health with a group of software developers. But I think as we've been talking, we've even surprised ourselves with how much is similar between, your career and your environment and that of your community and this community. And I want to just give you an opportunity to maybe share some of the things that have stood out to you about those similarities.
Yeah, I mean, this is a good launching off point. Since I talked about my mother and the nexus between my mother and tech, I remember that I was given for Christmas in 1978 or 9, maybe 1980. I want to say something with a 7 in front of it, a Commodore 64. So for anybody in the tech world, that's like the white whale, right? Or that's it's like a 57 Chevy or something like that. So I just want to feel that I want you to ease into this conversation, everybody. I want you to know that we have some affinity when it comes to the history of tech. Not to mention Pong. No, you know what? Here's the thing. Coming out of COVID, I don't think there's any place on earth where it isn't appropriate to start talking about mental health and mental illness and mental wellness, because we all went through a massive trauma. And I don't know if people think of it that way enough. We think of it as like, boy, what is 2020 was, it's like 3 years ago now. That's so 3 years ago. But this conversation would be relevant if we hadn't gone through a global pandemic, if we were just talking about our devices and TikTok and phones and, living in it. And you can almost hear the language that's used to talk about how we've become disconnected in our society, how video games or how, our screens, how much time we spend monitoring our screen, like that. I think we're almost numb to hearing that maybe this is having an impact on our consciousness and in our wellness. So we want to be heard. We want to be understood. And I think one of the ways that you can get at feeling understood is listening to somebody talk about something you may be experiencing yourself.
And so when you just think about your career as an actor, the kinds of projects that you've worked on, the positions you've put yourself in, can you talk for a minute about the kind of pressure maybe you felt yourself, whether you put it on yourself or you felt that pressure from your environment or the folks around you?
I would say the most stress that I feel in my professional life is trying to get the job, is before you have the job. That sense of like being on the treadmill and having a hustle and having to talk to the agents and talk to the managers. And there's almost like a dual track awareness where on the one hand, I'm in there fighting. I'm not getting this audition. I am getting an audition, but I wasn't prepared. I went in and screwed up the audition, whatever. And then there's this other track that's like, I belong. I belong here. I deserve to be here. And those two things, sometimes they meet. And it's a beautiful thing when they meet, when your hustle meets your sense of mission and purpose.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Developers, their version of it might be that they work on a product that, needs to either go around their company and get buy-in, get approval, or it's going out into the public, right? And folks like you and I are playing with it. It's an app on our phone. It's a game. And they're getting feedback, right? And a lot of it can be really critical, especially in this day and age. And so, I hear from peers and colleagues talking about how I take it personally. I feel like it's a reflection on me personally, as opposed to the work that I did in my job. Do you have one or two tips on ways, if you've been successful at it at any points in your career, of like removing yourself from the work to not take that kind of feedback so personally?
Most of the time, when the environment exists, when there isn't a strike and we're able to be working and so forth, I find myself intentionally focusing on other things. Did a triathlon, went to grad school, got really involved in my union activities. And part of that was a way to inoculate myself from the vicissitudes of show business, where you're up, you're down, you're in, you're out. People, they're not looking for somebody like you right now, kind of a vibe. And it's like, well, that's cool. That's cool. It affects me. I'm excited or I'm bummed or whatever, but I have this other thing that I'm doing. I've made 2 movies that were about video game developers. And the hero of both movies was like an 18-year-old kid who was developing an independent game. It's just really interesting to me that wish fulfillment is now existing in this tech space, where society is looking at tech now the way you used to look at baseball, as this like untouchable thing that, you've got The Natural, or you've got these movies out there that with the music and the swelling and the everything. And if you can achieve, I did a movie about a football player, and his dream was to play football. Now kids are having dreams to develop video games and to be in tech, in the tech world. And I sort of feel like that should be a nice little coating that you can put over, a little salve that you can put over your anxiousness when you exist in that space.
I caught you on a recent podcast where it came up, the subject of celebrities and fame, and you shared this comment about the importance of knowing your way back to center, right? And I thought, wow, that's really that resonated with me. And I thought maybe there's a way to kind of apply that here in terms of knowing your way back. Anytime those thoughts are swirling, or you're feeling out of control, or that energy, that negative energy is building up around you or inside you, how do you know your way back to a healthier place?
So I'm so glad you brought that up. I mean, I think that was the first time I conceptualized that, was like in that moment with that colleague of mine who we did that podcast with. Somehow I picture people in the tech world being numb a lot of the time. I don't know how you couldn't be when you spend so much time physically, like in your own pod or in your own cocoon of your computer and your mental life or whatever. If you feel it, just like identifying it, just being able to say, like, oh, wait a minute, I know this feeling. I know this numbness. I know this, for me, it's like racing thoughts, or hyperness. I'm so hyper, my legs are bouncing, and when I'm talking really fast, or I'm noticing my eating patterns, or my, consuming caffeine or whatever, sugar, or, and or not working out or working out. If you can at a certain point sort of go like, oh, wait a minute, like I recognize this. I recognize that this is a thing I experience. And then from that point where you recognize, like, you know, you're on the outer rim of your own, I don't know, your own consciousness, your own joy, your own comfort, your own professionalism, whatever it is. And then you remember, like, I know what the sweet spot is. I know what the sweet spot of fulfillment is. I know what the sweet spot of focus is, where I'm not fighting so hard to stay focused. And I'm not so like you just, there's a sweet spot. And if you can try and draw a line, and it probably takes a lifetime to master it, but a line from that thing that you note that is where you don't want to spend too much time, and the place where you know is a good spot for you to be. And you can, maybe even leave a trail of breadcrumbs for yourself on the way in or the way out, where you sort of go like, okay, this is generally halfway to that place I don't want to be, or this is generally halfway back. I don't know what that is for all the people who are watching this right now, what it is for them. But if they don't have it, if there isn't anything that they know to do to ride their way back to that place, or even what that centered place is, have faith that it's there. And I think part of it is being willing to look and not assume it doesn't exist. One of the dreams that we can have as workers, as beings or whatever, is to find the place that does exist where I'm experiencing fulfillment. That place exists.
So many of the characters you've played have always been dreamers and eternal optimists. And I wonder what you might have to say about what some of your characters, and maybe it's Samwise, what he might have to say about this conversation.
The characters that I've played that people connect with the most, the thing that they all seem to have roughly in common is family. In one film, they want to find the treasure so they can save their family's home. In another movie, the kid wants to achieve this great thing with football, and the most important thing to him is that his dad knows, and that his dad comes and sees it, and then he can go home and show his dad his report card. In another one, in the epic trilogy, they're literally saving their home environment, the Shire. In a TV show with Demogorgons, I played a character who was creating a sense of home for the woman who had been terrorized for the whole first season when her children were in jeopardy, and he's just a nice guy, and he just comes and brings home to them, and home is him. Home is him. Home is how he wants to play puzzles, and how he just wants to sit and watch a movie and have a nice dance, and say, I'll be here when you get home, kids, and help a kid out. So there's something about having something that's worth fighting for, having something that's worth preserving at stake. And then whatever adventure, whatever quest, whatever task or journey or challenges are laid before you, there's the hard work of doing the thing that I suppose no real achievement or satisfaction can happen if you aren't challenged. If you don't have something that's hard, then it was easy and you can kind of take it for granted. But if you do something that's hard, and it usually comes at some cost. I mean, that's what wisdom is. Wisdom Wisdom comes from having navigated those challenges successfully or unsuccessfully, because they're not always going to be successful. And finding a way not to, how do you start over? How do you start? How do you start to find the next gig? How when it's failed? How when it's succeeded and there's nothing and you got how do you start? That's friggin' hard. That's hard. That is a recipe for mental exhaustion and emotional exhaustion.
That exhaustion is very present. We talk about burnout all the time. Folks that are just heads down, working on things, and sometimes it's really thankless. Doesn't always get praise, doesn't always get credit, and it's on to the next. What have you done for me lately? Can you relate? Have you ever felt burnout?
I think people must experience burnout as a failure. Like, I'm burned out, therefore there must be something deficient in me. F that. No way. If you're burned out, if you run a marathon, that's what's so great about marathons and triathlons and stuff. When you finish, you're so exhausted, but you're so exhilarated because you are burned out. Your legs are burned out. Your cardiovascular system is burned out, but you've achieved something. And there's a sense that you will recover, and there will be another marathon. There will be another triathlon to run. There'll be more triathlons they will outlive your lifetime, So that idea of burnout, I think the question becomes, do people feel like they earned that burnout, or the burnout happened because or happened on them, or happened at them, caught up with them? Do you feel with burnout like until you physically cannot go anymore, your psychology and your body, mind, and spirit cannot go any further, you are burned out, then that's proof that you've done that you did it. Maybe it's better to recognize this mode I'm in right now, I'm gonna be burned out if I keep doing this. Is that burnout gonna be in the interest of something that I'm trying to achieve, or is it a habit? Understanding your relationship to your burnout, you can't hide from it. You can pretend it's not there. You can put blinders on, but it's happening. So developing some conscious relationship to your burnout mode when that happens, oh boy, that would seem to me a very useful skill. And the other last little thing I would just sort of throw out there, which is something I've never been that good at in life, but that's when you're thinking about other people.
I'm glad you brought up this notion of helping other people, because, there is this other side of the coin around a mental health conversation, which is that there is positive mental health. We've talked a lot about the negatives, and it's easy to focus on those challenging aspects of it, the burnout and, going into those dark places and feeling those feelings, tough personalities, what have you. But there's also that aspect of maybe you're creating something that's going to help other people, or maybe you're just helping one of your colleagues, accomplish a task, accomplish a goal. There's pride, there's accomplishment, there's self-realization, right? And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on some of those other aspects of mental health.
Performers and developers, I think, must have a lot more in common than I realized when we started this conversation. When you're giving a performance on stage, you're facilitating an emotional journey for the audience. Real people right in front of you, close enough that you can touch, are going through these emotions. And so you have these emotions with them. And afterwards, this is what catharsis is. You've had an emotional journey where you've laughed and cried, been angry, you've done all those things. But the goal is that you're creating something meaningful. The project where I use this toy, there was no question at all, at any second in the 2 years I was down there, slogging, hard work, 18-hour days, 6-day weeks, hard work, uncomfortable work. Never a doubt that we were doing something that was of value to other people. And I've met so many people that have words and images, my likeness tattooed on them, emblazoning on their body the value that it has to them. The ideas that are, there's some good in this world and it's worth fighting for. Tattooed, not all who wander are lost, tattooed on their arm. Like, we knew, I don't know if I knew the tattoo thing, but I kind of did know the tattoo thing, but we knew that this kind of value was being created. And so in a way, we were willing to do more, go further, work harder, try harder, go deeper than we'd ever done on anything I'd ever done on anything in my life before or since. I mean, I couldn't do it now. In my current physical state, I could not physically survive the journey if we did it again, but I would try. I would do it again in a heartbeat because that's what it meant.
All right, Sean. So let's do a lightning round here. I got a bunch of questions that we've received from some folks out there that they want to know, right? Which Lord of the Rings movie was your favorite to act in?
Return of the King.
Which one was your favorite to watch?
Return of the King.
You have a favorite?
It's a false choice. It was all one movie to us. But anyway, go ahead.
That's right. You were all shooting it all in one fell swoop.
Yep.
Do you have a favorite snack when you're watching a movie?
Milk Duds.
If we asked your family who their favorite character is of yours that you've played, what would they say?
Ooh. Maybe Doug from 50 First Dates.
I heard you on the Michael Rosenbaum podcast talking about Encino Man and how you and Brendan Fraser would go and play video games in between sets or in between cuts. Do you remember what games you played and who won?
I want to say one of the Mario games, one of the first Mario games, and Brendan would have been better than me for sure. He wins an Oscar and he can destroy me in video games. What a life.
In the broader world of games, digital, video games, or other, do you have a favorite genre of game?
I really like the skirmish mode on real-time strategy games. So you're playing opposite somebody else and you're trying to destroy their base and they're trying to get into your castle and that kind of thing. That's my absolute favorite.
You an iPhone guy or an Android guy?
iPhone.
Do you have any other favorite connected devices?
Garmin watch, which I haven't worn in a while, but the telemetry that's available, little piece of equipment. If you're swimming or diving or running or mountaintop or cycling or like whatever you're doing, picking your nose, this thing can give you the absolute, data that you want on it.
Would you rather read a physical book, read a digital book, or watch something on a screen?
I want to say read a physical book, but I never do anymore. I'm always reading in the digital space. And I'm in the grad school, so I'll get textbooks and I want the physical textbook. So I order the textbook and then I spend all the time looking, doing it online. So yeah. But read a book.
One last one for you here. You're at a restaurant and a Rudy chant breaks out. Are you egging them on, feeling it, or you want to throw some food at them?
Well, it depends. Are we like at a TGI Fridays or like a Spago? I think it depends on attire, really. I can picture myself getting up on the chair and doing the Rudy speech in response to that, but I probably shouldn't say that to into a camera where people might test it. I'm always like, the funny thing is we'll be going through an airport and I'll look at my wife and she'll be like, what? I was like, did you hear that? She goes, what? I was like, Rudy, they're doing the Rudy. She goes, no, they're not. I'm like, my wife thinks that I hear the Rudy chant when it's not happening.
And I'll get you out of here on this one. Any last words of wisdom from Samwise that you can share with our audience today, folks that are looking for some parting inspiration from Sean Astin.
Well, first thing I would say is thank you. The work that you do in your with your careers and your work life have animated my life for decades. So thank you for making things easier and possible. Not all products can be perfect, but the product makers are pretty great. So well, since we're talking about mental health, the quote that I'm thinking of is it's like in the great stories, the ones that really mattered, full of darkness and danger they were, and sometimes you didn't want to know the end, because how could the end be happy? How could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad had happened? But in the end, it's only a passing thing, this shadow. Even darkness must pass, and a new day will come, and when the sun shines, it'll shine out the clearer. Those are the stories that stayed with you, that meant something, even if you were too small to understand why. But I think I understand now. Folk in those stories had lots of chances of turning back, only they didn't. They kept going because they were holding on to something. What are we holding on to? That there's some good left in this world, and it's worth fighting for. And then
That's awesome. That's beautiful, and a fitting end for our conversation. Sean, thank you so much for hanging out with us today and sharing your experience and your advice. On behalf of all of us, I'm wishing you and your family a happy and healthy year, much more career success for you, and your studies as well. Good luck.
Yeah. Oh, God.
And we can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you so much. God bless you all. Much love always.
What a treat. Thank you, Sean Astin, so much for your words of wisdom on this sensitive yet important topic. And thank you, Dave, for being such a wonderful host. Sean was kind enough to sign some of our prizes, and I'm just getting word that we're going to announce our first winner right now on the stream. Okay, so our first winner is a senior engineering manager at Adobe who lives in San Jose, California. And it looks like our first GitKon Live prize winner is Bruce Bullis. All right, Bruce, congratulations. Someone will be in contact to help you collect your prize. Many congratulations there. And there's still a chance to win. So for all of you who are looking to win your own prize pack, head over to gitkon.com. Next up, it's time to duel. That's right, we have dueling perspectives on a timeless software development debate of Monorepo versus Multi-Repo. In one corner, we have Nitish Garg, a staff engineer at Rippling with over 5 years of experience specializing in development productivity and infrastructure engineering. In the other corner, we have Andreas Hermann, a physicist turned software engineer currently leading the Scalable Builds group at Twig. Our referee will be our very own Keith Daulton, a principal software engineer at GitKraken focused on developing GitLens for VS Code and shared component libraries. Let the friendly debate begin.
Welcome to Whose Repo Is It Anyway? The show where everything's on the spot and the points don't matter. That's right. The points are just like dev estimates in determining a project due date. Does not matter. Today we have two fantastic developers joining us to debate the hottest topic in version control, monorepos versus multi-repos. Let's meet our panelists. First up, we have Nitish Garg. Tell me a little about yourself, Nitish.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for introducing me. And my name is Nitish. I've been working at Oscar Health from last 5 years. For almost my entire time, I work for a team called Developer-Productivity. So as it sounds, we create tools for around 400 developers at Oscar right now. And I think I really enjoy that. I think it's really high value projects that we get as a developer productivity engineers. Before joining Oscar, I was working for a startup called TPublic. And before that, I worked for Bloomberg for 5 years. So in total, I have 11 years of experience. And I'll hand it over back to you.
Awesome. And all the way from Switzerland, we have Andreas. Take it away, Andreas.
Thank you, Keith. Hi, everyone. My name is Andreas. I've been working at Twig since 2017. I've been working with the Bazel build system there since 2018. I now lead what we call the Scalable Builds group. We're a group of people specializing on build systems, especially scalable build systems for large polyglot use cases. So systems like Bazel, Buck, Pants. We really like to combine Nix and Bazel. We also contribute to these systems upstream. We maintain open source extensions to them, and we help our clients with migrations to such build system assessments, optimization, and also learning. And before I got into all this, my background was in computational physics. Yeah, thanks. With that, back to you, Keith.
All right, and I'm your host, Keith Daulton, principal software engineer at GitKraken, where I work on the GitLens extension for VS Code, as well as shared component libraries that are used across GitKraken products. Previously, I worked at Chewy, where I worked with monorepos for component and prototyping libraries, as well as front-end applications such as the cart and checkout experience. So without further ado, I'll give you a rundown of our show. I'll be quizzing our developers with some hypothetical scenarios, as well as a few challenging and rather maybe unusual prompts to kind of go through the pros and cons of monorepos and perhaps some about multi-repos. So to start off, we'll have our Q&A round. I'll be looking for some short answers to these questions, maybe about 30 seconds to 2 minutes. So to kick this off, we'll start off with Andreas. This one's for you. What are some challenges with dependency management in monorepos? And would using multi-repos make any of those challenges easier?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can see a couple of challenges there. So one thing with monorepo build systems is that they tend to want to own the entire project, including your external dependencies. And depending on which ecosystem you're working on, these dependencies might be built with all kinds of different build systems themselves. Maybe if you're in a system like Python or Node or something like this, they come from a community package manager, which has its own way of doing things. Or maybe if you're in an ecosystem like C, C++, there isn't really one established standard build tool, and instead there is a variety of different ones, and to figure out how to embed those into your build system for each one. This is a place where it helps to have a community of people building up the standards and how to import these kinds of things, or to develop integrations with the upstream package managers where possible and where it makes sense. Then there is, of course, the question of which versions of your dependencies are you going to depend on. In monorepos, there is a tendency to prefer a single version policy where you want to use the single version of your dependencies across all the components in the repository, simply because otherwise it can very easily get very confusing if you have diamond dependencies with disagreeing versions at the end of it. And depending on what your project is structured, you might think that the multi-repo use case makes this easier. I think this depends on what exactly it is you're building. If you're really having independent components that run by themselves as their own services, then that can be true. But if you have components that end up linking each other, then you still have those diamond dependency issues. And you've now just added the problem of having to manage your versions and dependencies across those different repositories, incurring things like cascading updates and all these kinds of issues. Yeah, I think those are the kinds of things that come to my mind right now.
Awesome. Great answer there.
I would also like to add something to this, actually, from my experience.
Sure.
I think, like, in our experience, what happens is having a central, basically in monorepo dependency management, basically it makes it's central, like upgrading a particular library at the central place so that everyone gets in one shot. So it makes basically, since it's central, it makes things slightly slower. right? So entire company is basically depending on one team or two team to actually be able to upgrade it. But it also, but being central also has benefits, right? So we just have to do license checking just one place, and once we upgrade it, everyone gets the latest version of that third party dependency automatically. But yeah, it comes with one of the major challenges. Basically, it makes development slightly slow, sometimes really slow, because people just have to depend on each other to actually be able to get the new version of dependency. So that's what we have found out in Monorepo with dependency management.
Awesome. This is great stuff. So speaking of tricky things with monorepos, for you, Nitish, during the life of a branch, many changes can occur to your trunk, while that development is going on, and after some time, and you need to merge back with your PR, there's always that rebase step, right? And what are some good ways to smooth out that process after a rebase?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, I think fundamentally the problem is, like, let's say in a monorepo, when you cut off a new branch and then you try to merge back in, there could be like hundreds or thousands of new commit that came into that monorepo. So, and those could be changing the same libraries that, this is being used in your trunk branch or your basically branch code. And when it works absolutely fine with your old main branch, but when you merge back in, things start to break. So basically, we need to make sure that people are able to cache those breakages before merging into main, right? And so there are a few interesting things we could do for that. So first thing is basically have basically merge queues. I think Google uses that. So instead of basically just allowing people to merge into main directly, you have a merge queue. And then basically you first merge it in, then you run all your test suites depending on what changed in that particular commit. And then you actually merge back into the main. So this is something that I think people do when you have a really large monorepo and really large number of developers. But at Oscar, we had some luxury of some sort of flexibility. So what we end up doing is basically we check what are the targets that you're changing in your current branch, and what are the targets that have changed since you forked from the main branch, right? And if there is an overlap between them, then we ask for people to rebase. And it ends up saving us time in 50% of the cases. So in 50% of cases, they don't require rebase. And in 50% of cases, they require rebase. So yeah, so that's like a sort of sweet spot. We are able to save 50% of the people from rebasing every time.
All right. And then for the both of you, which approach, monorepo or multi-repo, do you think better facilitates developer collaboration? And why do you think that is?
Yeah, good question. I think the monorepo approach there, because you're able to reuse shared components, you're able to see what your coworkers are doing in other components of the project that otherwise you wouldn't easily have access to or wouldn't think to check out. Also, in some regards, you're forced to collaborate together. Nitish was mentioning dependency version alignment before. So you're going to have to talk to your coworkers to agree on when to upgrade a certain dependency and these kinds of things. So yeah, I think fostering collaboration is something that the monorepo can do very well.
Yeah, I plus one with Andreas on this. Actually, like Monorepo is really great for collaboration, and all the points Andreas said are absolutely true. I would like to add just two more points to it. I think the first one is explorability, right? Like now, basically, since Monorepo is there, I'm able to explore everyone's complex code they have been writing and shamelessly copy paste from their code base. So, which is great. It actually increases the developer productivity to some extent. And other thing is basically they are less, since everyone is a monorepo, everyone knows how to change everyone's code now, and everyone is checking in readmes how to operate with that particular directory or particular application. So it basically blocks less people. Let's say if somebody comes to my team, they have some requests and my team is busy, then actually they are able to pick that work, and with my team's help, we are able to push it to finish line. I think these are the two things we have seen in Wild to be helping us in Monorepo and developer collaboration.
So For the next round, we have the lightning round. These questions we've gathered from the community, and these will be super short form. You want to think just a few words to describe them. Think of them as sound bites, or the questions will be multi-choice. So for the multi-choice, I'll ask the panelists to write their answers on paper and reveal them at the same time. So let's jump right in. Monorepos in 3 words. Andreas.
Large, polyglot, encompassing.
And Nitish.
So I think my 3 words would be slow, solid, and for large scale organization.
Awesome. Converting repos from multi to mono or mono to multi, which is harder?
I think I'm imagining going mono to multi would be slightly harder, right? Because you would have a bunch of dependencies on your shared code base, and then you have to figure out how your shared code base would be replicated and across different multi repos. So yeah, I think mono to multi would be harder, according to me. But I'm curious to hear what Andreas has to say about it.
Definitely. Andreas?
Yeah, I actually think going multi to mono might be harder. I have to say I have little experience with that direction. Sorry, with the other direction. Usually we go multi to mono, not mono to multi, so it's hard to compare. But when going multi to mono, you have to take a variety of things that already exist and combine them together into one coherent piece, which requires a lot of coordination across teams and people. Whereas going from mono to multi, you could start out by essentially just copy pasting everything and just cutting out your piece with a cookie cutter, and then going from there. Yeah.
Both great perspectives on both. So that's fantastic. All right. So this one's a multi-choice. This will be an A or B. So what takes longer? Cloning a large monorepo, or that's A, or B, explaining a multi-repo's dependencies to a new developer. Ready?
Yeah.
All right, let's reveal. All right, we got B. How should monorepos be used in an organization? A, one repo to rule them all, or B, monorepos that only encapsulate specific scopes and purposes. Are we ready to reveal? All right, let's see what you came up with. A, B.
Actually, something to add on this A/B answer, which is very interesting. We have B. We have basically for Terraform, for LDAP, for our basically business logic, we have different monorepos. But actually, in long term, we want to go to this direction of everything in one place. But we are not there yet. It's very hard to achieve. So actually, this Andreas' answer is more correct. To be honest, A/B might be the right answer here.
Yeah, it's funny that this question comes up. We just recently discussed this internally in Twig. And indeed, many of the clients we work with, we see that they have multiple mono repos, which is a funny thing to consider. And really, it's more a question of where you are on the spectrum between the extreme of a complete polyrepo setup where every single component is its own repository, and then the extreme of one single monorepo where everything is in one single piece. And it comes down to what makes most sense for your organizational structure, right? If you're in the same repository, you're going to have to agree on some standards. You're going to have to agree on some common workflows and practices and infrastructure and so on. And maybe that doesn't make sense for all the teams in the organization. Maybe there are some parts of the organization that need their own setup, and so it makes sense to have several repositories there.
Great answers. I'm really loving all the feedback you all have given so far. This is fantastic. All right, so would you rather This is another multi-choice. A, refactor a monolithic code base without tests into a monorepo. Or B, merge 10 unrelated repos into one. You ready to review?
Yeah.
All right, let's see it. A and B. So I would love to hear how you both differ in these in this one.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Well, A certainly sounds like a painful exercise, but it sounds like one that would produce something of value. B, I would need to know more about what those things are and why we're putting them into one repository before I would feel like I would be doing something useful. So that's why I chose this way.
So for me, I think I was trying to choose a lesser evil. And I think having no test is absolutely evil, at least in the industry I work in. Bugs are really expensive in health insurance. They can be really costly for like $5 million, $10 million, something like that. So with that mindset, actually, when I heard no unit test, I thought it's a bigger evil. And so putting together a bunch of multi-repos into one monorepo, maybe for some end goal in future, that's what I was keeping in mind. So that's why I chose B.
So short answer question. What's one tool you can't live without when working with a monorepo?
Yeah, sure. So I think the one tool which is absolutely necessary evil is build systems like Pants or Bazel preferably. And because otherwise unit testing becomes really hard, basically. And tools like Bazel or Pants helps you figure out what are the minimal test cases that you need to run. I think that becomes very fundamental in monorepo.
Yeah, I totally agree with Nitish there. Bazel, Buck, Pants, one of those that can handle that scale. Now, of course, I also really like to include Nix there to manage your dependencies in a fully hermetic and reproducible way, but that's not always applicable in all use cases. But yeah, definitely the build system that scales to the use case.
Yeah, I actually, the second point is absolutely valid. I've seen that in my organization too.
All great points for sure. In a short sentence, how would you predict the future of repo structures over the next decade?
I think we're going to see more monorepos in organizations, within organizations. We're seeing that trend. An interesting question I find there is what it looks like in the open source ecosystems. I think there are a couple of interesting questions to answer in this space. Sort of, how do we manage dependencies between open source projects? How do we host that code in open source projects? How do we make sure that this actually scales? Because if you imagine that every small open source library project were a monorepo that rendered all its dependencies, maybe that's not the most scalable solution. So I think this is something where we're going to see interesting things. But within an organization, you can align around the monorepo, and you sometimes want control of the dependencies anyway. And so I think we're seeing a trend towards more monorepos in that space.
I think for me, the 10-year vision would be basically all third parties code on GitHub would be using Bazel, which will allow your Bazel project to pull in the other Bazel projects very easily in your workspace. And then you can actually cherry pick what other sort of packages you need on your basically third party dependency. So I think my 10-year vision would be Bazel would be much more prevalent and widely used, and in organizations and in third-party libraries as well. And I think like Bazel has to travel some distance too to make it easier for people to actually understand and in a usability perspective. It's slightly harder and slightly complex to understand right now. And so I think like, yeah, this would be my dream though, a dream trend if we get there.
So if monorepos and multi-repos were superheroes, who would they be?
The Monorepo would be Hulk and solid and wins the game eventually. And I think multi-repos would be Flash, fast but a bit clumsy.
Maybe the Monorepo would be Iron Man, a lot of bells and whistles to maintain all that complexity, but then also a lot of benefits from it. And the Polyrepo, I don't know. I'm trying to find one of those multiverse things, maybe Spider-Man with all the many different incarnations.
Actually, I like Andreas' answer better on this one, for sure.
Fantastic answers. And folks, that concludes our show. After an entertaining debate with some odd hypotheticals and some interesting comparisons, I've totaled up the points and we are at a tie. But much like our opinions, they can also not matter. So thank you for attending our Whose Repo Is It Anyway? And like to give a huge thanks to our panelists, Andreas and Nitish. And it was great asking you questions, and I really enjoyed hearing your responses. I learned a lot today from your all's opinions. So thank you very much for being on.
Meet GitKraken Client, the #1 Git GUI trusted by millions of developers. Begin your journey by visualizing your repo history with our interactive commit graph. If a merge conflict strikes, our powerful merge tool is there to simplify the process and fast-track resolution. With our dynamic workspaces, you can easily group repos, view their status, and perform multi-repo actions, streamlining your workflow. And when you add our other powerful features, your version control and team collaboration will reach new heights. Start your GitKraken journey and download GitKraken Client for free today. Thank you, gentlemen. That was a good, clean, and most importantly, a fun fight. If that conversation got you fired up, you're going to love what's next. Because where mono versus multi-repo may provide the foundation for developer experience, it's new innovation that drives the future of developer experience. Today, GitKraken is excited to share a new vision for that future. Please help me welcome Justin Roberts.
Hello, GitKon. My name is Justin Roberts. I am a Senior Director of Product here at GitKraken. I've been working with the team for the last 9 years to design, build, and deliver dev tools like the GitKraken Client and the brand new GitKraken CLI. I'm really excited to be here today. I want to talk about some of the things that we've been working on that will continue to improve the developer experience. And that is the title of my talk, how we are evolving the developer experience, and give you some insight into our vision of focus and collaboration for teams. Now, when we talk about the developer experience, it's really about creating an effective environment for developers to work. It's about reducing friction and cognitive load, and it's about shortening feedback loops for teams. Here at GitKraken, I think that we are uniquely positioned to help with that. We build a number of dev tools that help developers, including the GitKraken Client. We have GitLens inside of VS Code. We have a brand new GitKraken CLI for your terminal. And in the next couple of months, we'll be announcing GitKraken.dev, which is a browser-based experience for interacting with your teams, your workspaces, and your repositories. There are 2 features that we've been working on that kind of span all of those products. And they're really important for helping you improve your focus and helping you work with your team. The first is GitKraken Focus. It is aimed at improving individual developer productivity and facilitating better communication with your teammates. It aims to reduce the cognitive load and context switching when working across multiple systems and repositories. And the second one is called Cloud Patches, which I will explain in a little bit, let you think a little bit about what that might mean. But Cloud Patches are ultimately aimed at improving your team's productivity, helping you to shorten feedback loops by facilitating better collaboration earlier in the development cycle with your team. So when developers need to focus, what are we talking about? Well, developers' work is usually spread out across multiple systems and across multiple repositories. You're usually working on some sort of issue or task that's coming out of Jira or Azure, or maybe even in GitHub or GitLab or something like Trello. You have your current work in progress, your working directory changes, the code that you're writing, and that's going to be in your IDE. It's going to be showing up in your Git GUI. It's going to be showing up in your terminal. And then ultimately that work goes on to get reviewed, usually in a system like GitHub, GitLab, or Bitbucket, or Azure DevOps in pull requests. Now, the cognitive load involved in kind of managing all of these is really high because you have to constantly switch between multiple systems to see what the next thing is you need to work on, how you get to actually writing the code or reviewing the code. What we're trying to do is pull all of this information into a way that helps you focus on all of it, prioritize it, and take action on the most important things. So what you see here is a representation of the GitKraken focus view. This is in the client, but again, there's a representation of this same information in GitLens, in VS Code, in the GitKraken CLI in the terminal, and coming soon to gitkraken.dev. And really, it's about bringing all of that stuff together. It's listing all of your pull requests, your issues, and even your work in progress that's on your machine in one place so you can prioritize it and you can take action on it. So some of the things that this view is doing for you is it's highlighting the last time these things were active. So you can see kind of an activity stream of all of the items and when the last time someone left a comment or reviewed something. It's also really important for you to see status. So when you want to check on a PR or look at the status of an issue, you should be able to skim that really easily across all of the things that you're working on, across all of your repositories, and get an understanding of what you need to do next. Of course, we want to show you the titles of all of these items and bring in metadata about those from different systems, things like the number of lines changed, if there's comments on your item, but we're also layering in additional insights from GitKraken with things like PR complexity, something that will show you how large and complex a PR is so that you can understand how long it might take for that thing to get reviewed. We also really want to highlight the people that you're working with, your collaborators. Who is that person that is assigned to your PR review? Who is reviewing, whose PR are you reviewing? Who have you been having that conversation about on a Jira issue with? Seeing all of those people attached to the items that you're prioritizing and facilitating ways to communicate with them easier, notify them that you might need help on something, or ping them about a pull request is what the goal of this focus view is. And of course, we're all working on code, right? So we want to relate everything back to the repository that you're working on and the branch that might be associated with that work across all of your repositories. So you don't have to switch into a specific repo to look at all of your pull requests or go look at Jira to see what items you have. We're consolidating all of that information here and showing you it's this work on this repository on this branch and allowing you to easily jump out to go continue to code or to go review that pull request in the client and go view the file diffs. And then something that I think is really magical and where we're really pushing what we can do in the focus view here is suggesting what the next thing is that you need to do. So if you need to merge a PR because the reviews are done, because CI has passed and GitHub says that that thing is mergeable, well, then we can just highlight to you that that thing is merged. And we can also surface any other actions that you might want to take on any of these other types of items in a way that's really easy to access so that you can just get these things done on your list. Another thing we hear about from developers all the time is they want to be able to prioritize their own stuff. So we're layering additional information onto items in these focus views. One of them is pinning, which basically allows you to pin any items inside of this view so that they float up to the top and you know that these are the most important things that you want to work on. And again, because this is all working within GitKraken, if you access this list on any one of our other products, your pinned items will be there and you will see what is important for you. We've also introduced kind of the opposite of pinning. And if you use Gmail or if you use Slack, you'll be familiar with this. It's the idea of snoozing something. So if you're pruning this list, trying to find the things that are most important, you can snooze the ones that maybe you want to get to tomorrow or next week and put them into another place so that you can come back to them. We're really excited about some of the things that we're working on now to get this to continue to improve on snoozing, which is timed snoozing and kind of activity snoozing. So if you wanted to say, only bring this thing back into my main list when someone comments on a PR that I have open, you could do that. So there's some of the really fun things that we're working on with the focus view, things that you can try across all of our products now. The second feature I want to talk about is cloud patches. Now, the name will make sense in a little bit, but really what cloud patches are about are shortening feedback loops and enabling developers to collaborate earlier in the development process. Usually when we talk to developers, we see that they are collaborating way too late in the process, often by the time that the code has already been pushed up into review. So an individual maybe is coding, trying to figure out a problem. They'll push a review up so that they can add people to come in and take a look at it. And in our opinion, this is way too late in the process. It's harder to make changes when you're already at review stage. Changes that you push up are triggering CI. There's just a lot of good reason to move the collaboration earlier into the development process. What we'd really like to see is developers collaborating earlier at the planning and coding stages where they can be a little more flexible, they can shorten feedback loops to collaborate really quickly about changes that they want to make, and then ultimately have a review that when it is actually submitted is much easier to read through. Everyone's kind of already on board with it and it should get merged a lot faster. Now, what we want to do is we want to take advantage of patches to do this. And a Git patch is really just taking a group of code and putting it into a file. And we've talked about teams that still use patches to collaborate without having to push up a branch. But there's a lot of friction involved in it. You have to download that file. You have to go open up an email and write an email to someone and attach that file and send it to them. They have to find it in their email. They have to go download it. They have to know what repository it's in. They have to know how to go apply it. There's just a lot of cycles involved in getting that kind of little bit of code shared with someone that it's not very easy to do, and not a lot of people do it. We want to kind of elevate the patch by providing some services around sharing and collaborating and storing context around changes so that you can use that earlier on in the cycle to collaborate on code. So what is a cloud patch? Cloud patch is really just a Git patch that we are storing in a secure location so that we can give you a link. That link can very easily be shared with someone, and when they follow that link, they get the context about everything on that patch, what repository it should go to, if it's associated with a pull request. If they are using any of the GitKraken tools, they can follow the link to go view that patch and apply it very easily, and then make responses to that so that they can push it out. Now, I do want to call out that cloud patches are incredibly experimental right now. We're in the early stages of figuring out what they can do, but if you're using the GitKraken client or you're using GitLens and VS Code, you should be able to go and try those features by turning on the experimental settings. We're really curious to see kind of what you think about them. Now, what are some of the use cases for cloud patches? So here we are inside of GitKraken client, and I have some working directory changes, and I want to share these easily with someone on my team. Well, what I would be able to do in the GitKraken client is click a button to initiate creating this patch, and it will allow me to add the files that I want to add a quick description so that the person who follows this patch kind of knows what it's all about, and I'll create that patch. And you'll see that we've generated a link that you can use to share to someone. We've added that cloud patch to a list in the client so that you can easily reference it again, get the link, share it with somebody else. You could also think of this as a way to have a really easy kind of cloud stash, right? If you're someone who works on code on one machine and then wishes you had all of your stashes on another, cloud patches would be a way to facilitate that because they would be securely stored and accessible on any machine. So that's the first example of just sharing that code. Someone would be able to follow that link and apply it. But what happens if you're already in the PR phase and you want to suggest some changes? Well, suggesting changes right now can be a little cumbersome, or it cannot have the kind of full power of your IDE behind them. Generally, you have to suggest changes in line kind of inside of the service that your hosting service has the pull request in. And that can be a little tedious and not quite be exactly what you want. we have a GitKraken browser extension that will now inject controls into your hosting service providers that will let you jump out and make a more complex PR suggestion. So imagine that you would click a button that says, I want to suggest these changes, but I want to do it in GitKraken. That would send you through our deep link service that would send you to your client. And now I'm in the client, I'm on that repository, and it has selected all of the commits that are part of that pull request. So I can see the combined diff of those. And I can really look at them. I can see what the changes are. I could make edits directly inside of GitKraken, but if I really want the full power of my IDE, I'd likely jump out into something like VS Code, right? Now, let's say I just want to comment some of these things out here, and I want to suggest this as a set of changes. I'll go back into the GitKraken client, add a description to what this cloud patch will be. I'm just suggesting these changes and suggest those changes with the link. Now, that link I could manually send to someone, but if they're looking at their pull request, they would come in here and they would see that I suggested these changes to them. They would be able to click that link that goes through the same deep link service and shows them the changes. Now they get to decide which of those changes they actually want to apply and commit and push up to their branch that's going to trigger CI and do everything else on their pull request. The last example I want to give is one that we've heard from a lot of people, and it is really about collaborative merge conflicts. So let's say you're working on some code and you run into a conflict when you're merging. GitKraken client has a really powerful merge conflict editor, but if you still can't figure it out, if this z-index number just isn't something that you understand and you want to get some help from someone else, we want to facilitate sharing the conflict state with someone else, and we can do that with cloud patches. So the idea that you would be that you share this kind of set of changes. You, again, are creating a cloud patch. You're sharing this as a merge conflict that, again, has a link that you can share with someone else. And now that they follow that link, they would be able to get their repository into the same state. If they did it through something like GitLens, they would be able to do that with a work tree that doesn't disrupt their flow that they're in. They could help you resolve that merge conflict, bundle it back up into a response to that cloud patch, and send it back to you so that you could apply it to your repository, resolve the merge, and then move on. So those are just some of the really amazing features that we're working on in GitKraken across all of our products. I hope that they're helpful. I hope you have a chance to go out and try them. Please give us any feedback that you can so that we can help to improve those as quickly as possible. And have a good rest of your GitKon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Justin. Let's keep it rolling with another dev tool with the power to transform your workflows and accelerate your progress. Here to reveal the new insights driving peak dev productivity is Jeff Schinella and Kevin Bost. Jeff is a product director at GitKraken with a fierce commitment to helping teams understand and optimize their dev performance. And Kevin is a senior software architect at Intelitect. Highly skilled in developing elegant solutions for complex problems, Kevin is particularly passionate about teaching others to write quality code. You can find him frequently hosting live coding sessions on Twitch. Let's listen in.
Hey, Kevin, how are you doing? Nice to see you again. We're here with Kevin Bost. My name's Jeff Schinella. I work at GitKraken as a product director. I work on our sort of cloud services, dev services platform side of things, driving cloud content to the tools and products that we make here at GitKraken. And I'm joined by Kevin Bost. Kevin, why don't you take a few seconds, introduce yourself, and let everybody know who you are.
Yeah, Jeff, thank you. My name is Kevin Bost. I'm a senior software architect with a company out of Spokane, Washington called Intelitect. I'm a Microsoft MVP and, more importantly, a GitKraken ambassador.
Thanks for being here, Kevin. We're going to talk about a few different things, insights, engineering metrics, developer productivity, developer experience. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say, just get some real world input and your opinions, ideas, things that, you experience in your day-to-day. And we can, share that with the rest of everybody here at GitKon. So it's been pretty popular, like the rise of engineering metrics, engineering productivity. You've got things like space, you've got like DORA metrics. There's a whole bunch of different, best practices, things that are out there, common metrics and methods we see across the gamut. And a lot of teams are using these to sort of fine tune and produce, outputs and outcomes that they want to see in their teams. Could you talk a little bit about, what you're familiar with, things that you might see in your day to day, the things that you and your team do, to try to leverage these types of metrics and engineering insights when you're working with your team?
Yeah, certainly. So I work with a variety of different teams, and so it's going to vary a little bit from team to team. But in a lot of them, we end up specifically looking at metrics as part of our daily stand-ups. Most of the time, we're doing some sort of Scrum or Scrum similar process. And at a minimum, checking things like test rates, failures, deployment frequency are kind of key metrics that oftentimes the teams are looking at. Just making sure that things are moving out, especially for some of the bigger projects. It's nice to be able to run your tests on every pull request, but you've always got a set of maybe integration or UI related tests that take a little bit longer to run, probably don't run on every PR, but you're running them on deploys out to your dev or test type environment to make sure your builds are good, and making sure that those insights are surfaced up to the team, let them know, hey, here's how it's going, or, yesterday's release, yeah, it tanked. Everything's crashing and going down. We need to look at this right away. So those are oftentimes easy ones that we look at as well. And occasionally diving into more code-related metrics, cyclomatic complexity at times, but it does depend a lot on the team.
Gotcha. Yeah, a lot of teams we've talked to have, kind of three goals in mind, right? They want to increase how fast or how, frequently developers are pushing code, committing code, getting code out there into the production environments. They want to make sure it's good quality. And then they also want to sort of measure and understand like how effective or how satisfied like developers' experiences are being, right? From what you mentioned, maybe you can speak to a little bit about it. Would you agree with that sort of sentiment? Is there more to it? Do you look for other things involved, or how do you find some of those outcomes or goals that you have in mind when you're looking at these metrics?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, shipping's a feature and every app has to have it. And so anything that can help us move from development all the way out to production. A big one for us that we see when we're looking to try to improve a team's kind of productivity is oftentimes looking at story size. And this one kind of comes out in a lot of those metrics around maybe merge rates or similar. If a story is taking a team an entire sprint to go through and actually get done and things aren't being broken down, you start to see that lag time increase. Deployments to productions take longer, merge rates take longer, PR reviews take longer. The entire step in that development process just kind of increases and moves out. It also can be an indicator of if testing isn't being done appropriately kind of mid-sprint. Rather than testing things rapidly as stuff is coming in, some teams prefer to do a bunch of work and then throw it over the fence at a QA team to say, hey, now go and test all of this kind of the following sprint. And all that ends up doing is kind of producing that lag time and increasing the feedback loop, which oftentimes the idea of trying to shift everything left, we want our feedback in quicker. We want developers to see that right away. So often looking at that merge rate, throughput, and deployment frequency are useful, but oftentimes those are sometimes symptoms of a problem, not necessarily the problem in and of itself. So kind of using those metrics as a guide to know where to look and figure out kind of where the problems lie.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And it actually leads to kind of something I was going to talk about, which is the risks maybe involved in focusing too heavily on metrics. And I know, you mentioned they are definitely indicators, right? They can be guides for the team, for you, for other developers to see, hey, we see that there's something happening. We just don't know where they are. And one of the caveats a lot of people are talking about, as soon as you make this metric the goal, it becomes a bad metric, right? Like as soon as you start to say, oh, well, the merge rate's going down, I know how I can fix the merge rate. I can merge more and just make smaller commits and do that whole thing. Well, that's not really helpful, right? So what are some things that you think are helpful or useful in balancing the observability of like these metrics, but balancing it out with not making the end goal the metric itself? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's exactly on the point. Is the moment you make it a target rather than a goal, it becomes a problem. And so in a lot of cases, when we're working with teams, we try to focus on having the team have buy-in on what these are, understanding why it's better, and trying to help them move towards it. That's part of why we like to look at them as part of the stand-ups, is because if the teams have buy-in on understanding kind of the direction that we want to go of, hey, we are looking to improve our release frequency, right? How quickly are we actually releasing? You know, in the last 6 months, have we done 1 release or 5? Well, if we've gone from 1 to 5, that's great. We're moving in a positive direction. There was one team we were working with that was only releasing about once a quarter, and started looking at different metrics, diving in to figure out where the problems were. And at the end, it came down to going back to that story size. Things were big. Oftentimes, teams weren't merging things, but maybe once a sprint. And so working at bringing that down with the goal of looking at how often we're releasing to production and getting the team in that mindset of, hey, we want to get stuff in quicker, a lot faster, and start to work through those individual problems. At the end of the day, a lot of these metrics are measuring technical things, and a lot of problems are people things. And it's really hard to solve people type process problems with technical solutions. You can only kind of use them as a guide and a measurement. And the other one too is really focusing on the people behind it. Like oftentimes we'll go ahead and look at if maybe there's one particular developer that's not getting a lot of stuff merged through, that's not necessarily a negative on that developer, but it might be an indication that, hey, maybe there's something going on. Maybe we should have a conversation and see, hey, maybe there's something not even work related happening. And so using that as a way to be able to kind of pull that information in and be able to target that information can be really powerful as well.
Yeah, that sounds great, actually. And I mean, that focus on the individual, but like focus on the developer, that's something that sort of has thankfully been coming out of studies that people like Avi Noda and the DevX movement, they've all been sort of looking at a lot of these notions of the developer experience and what it takes to avoid making the goal the metric itself, right? When we look at the individual dev, for example, I think a lot of what we see out there as far as the 3 pillars of DevX goes, there's the aspect of cognitive load, like helping the developer not find or not be overwhelmed by the amount of information or demand of things that have to juggle. The sort of increased frequency of like feedback loops, like you were saying, like getting information critical to them to increase the pace at which they're, understanding when there's an issue or when, something's being blocked. All of these things are really part of just kind of like that DevX spectrum. And I'm curious from your point of view, right, to help enable some of that stuff and things like flow state, like what are some processes or things you have in place that you and your team maybe do to, invest in that component, right? Invest in the person, invest in the individual dev to help them work faster, better, more efficiently.
Yeah, so a lot of it comes down to, one, we try to make sure that we paired all of our devs with a mentor. And this isn't necessarily a technical mentor, though oftentimes it can be in a lot of cases, but somebody who's kind of focused on the individual and making sure that they're feeling productive, they're feeling successful. And if not, being that advocate kind of alongside of them of, okay, what do you need? What would help you out here? Kind of at a higher level too, at the management, we also invest a lot in trying to make sure that we have good scrum masters and product owners on the team. I mean, those oftentimes are the unsung heroes where people think that they can get by without them. But oftentimes, whoever is filling kind of that product owner role can make or break your team very, very quickly. It doesn't matter how good your developers are. If they build the wrong thing, at the end of the day, it's worthless. So really trying to hone that in. And then on the Scrum Master side, oftentimes looking to make sure people are trained on being that shield. Because too often, especially when we're talking about like developer productivity, meetings and managers are, I think, one of the biggest inhibitors in a lot of cases of you almost got to beat them off with a stick of, no, let the developers work. They are not productive when you have them locked in a meeting. This is not useful. Now, obviously meetings are useful. Things need to happen. There's plenty of time for that. But if the developers constantly have that interrupted flow, I mean, there's been plenty of studies about how long it takes the developer to kind of get back into that coding mindset after their flow's been broken. And I know on some of our teams, this is an active problem that we're trying to work to resolve, of constant interruptions, constant meetings, and the devs being jerked around in too many directions, and frankly having a lot of trouble trying to get their traction started to get moving. So
yeah, that's a big challenge, right? Is just the interruption or the distraction, right? You know, you might have some issue you're working on trying to resolve, and then fires come up, right? Or somebody reaches out on Slack and says, hey, can you look at this real quick? Or I have a quick question about our billing system, and then you're triaging something for 2.5 hours in, trying to figure out a bug that you didn't expect to work on. Those are all like really good examples of how these distractions are just naturally coming up. So
yeah,
I think it's a challenge everybody's facing, trying to protect the attention of the developer so that they can focus on the things they need to build, and some of that happens through process, through workflows. Do you have any like tooling or things that the devs kind of extensions or actions, things that help with that cognitive flow state, helping them keep focused?
Yeah, so a lot of times, so our developers are able to kind of flow through various IDEs, tools. A lot of them are heavy GitKraken users, myself included. Obviously, it's definitely a tool of choice that I prefer to go through and do. Having the ability to go through and keep track of what code reviews need to happen, because there is a balancing act with our developers of making sure that in order to keep the merge rate high, that you're actually doing reviews. We typically will set a minimum number of reviewers for PRs just to make sure that we've gotten enough eyes, code sharing, make sure quality bars are being met, that kind of thing. And being able to figure out what's my work that I need to work on. I don't want the developers spending time going, well, what ticket do I pick up next? What PRs are open that might be still pending a review, right? If a PR is sitting there for multiple days, that's a problem. Like somebody should have had time in multiple days to be able to actually go through and get that kind of review in. And again, it kind of comes back to, oftentimes we'll be looking at those metrics on the daily stand-up, and especially if we're seeing that our merge rate has plummeted, our Scrum Master hopefully slaps us and goes, hey guys, what's going on? Like, why aren't we getting, like, I see PRs are being opened. Why aren't we actually like merging these and closing? Like, is there a bunch of discussion going on? Like, what's the actual team dynamic happening? And sometimes it's perfectly fine. People are on vacation. Hey, we need somebody. This is blocked by that, whatever. But using those as the guide to know where to go next and where to look next, I think is kind of the most important to stay in that zone.
Yeah, that's one of the important questions that we've been exploring and trying to answer, right? And we have things where we're building today to try to alleviate some of that with our developers, like the focus view, right? Focus view is sort of about, hey, here's everything that I'm trying to juggle right now, and what can we make sense of? What are the things that need my attention, and what are the things that are blocking other people that I work with, right? That kind of thing. And so we're trying to reduce that cognitive load by creating this system in place to help you understand what's most important based on time, based on what you actually want to pay attention to that day. You can pin things, set them to the top, snooze them, move them around, to defer them to later. Like, all of those little sorts of productivity tools are super helpful. So it's good to hear you say some of that. I'm happy to hear like you and your team are actually working towards improving the quality of life of your devs. Is there anything else you'd like to share with regards to that and the developer experience?
I mean, I think the last thing I'll comment on is just kind of looking for opportunities to shift stuff left so that we aren't being interrupted. One of the big ones was security vulnerabilities that was coming in and plaguing our team, because as soon as one comes up, it's obviously this high priority, somewhat disruptive. And things like how GitHub's advanced security kind of helps shift that into our development flow rather than it being something that a vulnerability scanner flags us for later. Just really kind of helps us get zeroed in and focused on it. So at the end of the day, it really is using the metrics to try to guide our decisions and hopefully see the direction where things are going. I will mention one other thing in terms of like testing. is we will oftentimes use either number of tests or code coverage, which are those are the easy metrics people latch onto and try to measure to get something useful out of. And it really has to be a direction. I'll often tell people code coverage is a negative metric. You can have 100% coverage, and that doesn't tell me how well your code is tested. It just tells me that you haven't missed any lines. But if you have something that's uncovered, I can guarantee you it's not tested. So having people with kind of that understanding of, hey, we should be moving towards more tests, more coverage, making sure it's the right test, because sometimes just straight up deleting the test that's not adding value is the right answer. And it's okay to see those. It's okay to see metrics go in the quote unquote wrong direction, at least for some period of time, as long as it's understood why. Like, that's okay. And I think sometimes people get too focused on, well, we've got to be above a particular threshold. It's like, that's the wrong way. That's the wrong way of handling those types of data points.
So, Kevin, you mentioned the idea of shift left, and that's kind of one of the things that we've been strong believers in here, looking at ways we can take the dev collaboration, the things that are happening at the pull request level, and moving them to before the PR, right? It's important to kind of try to get that feedback about code ideas, things you're working on. So often, all of a sudden, the PR shows up, and you have 40, 50 comments of going back and forth and iteration on it, and a lot of this could be happening before you even get to the PR. So with us, we're looking at trying to institute this idea of like cloud patches, which is this ability to share code before you make the PR, right? Like you could be working on a branch, you could even see someone's PR and make changes outside of that PR branch and share code, sort of collaborate on the idea before you get to the PR level. I'm curious your thoughts on the pull request as the centralized focus of attention, and do you see most collaboration for you and your team happening there, and is there anything that you and your team do to enhance the experience of not having to make the PR this hub, kind of shift left to your focus and the attention of the developer?
Yeah, I think it varies a lot from team to team, but there's definitely on the better teams, there's definitely this shifting left mentality of being able to do it, because as you said, the PR tends to be that initial point of contact. And at some point that's too late, because by the time the PR is open, a developer's already invested some number of hours in getting to that point. And if they've gone down the wrong path, now there's this, well, shoot, we're throwing away all of this work. Some of my teams, we very much enjoy the idea of pair programming. So we will oftentimes do that just to eliminate that problem of, by the time you get to the PR is a formality, because we've already had multiple sets of eyes looking at it. We've already been collaborating together. It's easy to do. We may not pair on the whole thing. Maybe it's just some critical parts of a feature that we're working on that we'll go through and do as well. So leveraging various tools, maybe inside of like the Microsoft ecosystem with like the live share, to be able to go through and have that kind of collaborative editing. But definitely the idea of the cloud patches kind of excites me as a way of being able to move that information around, because all of the tools that have you both working on the same machine, unless you're both physically sitting at the same machine, there always is kind of this degradation of features that you end up picking up a little bit. And it's always nice when you can be able to collaborate on code and work with your system, your setup, your keybinds, your extensions in the environment you're familiar with, and go from there.
Yeah, I love that idea of making the PR an afterthought. That's super helpful. That'd be great if your PR is just, here's the checks, here's some basic comments, or looking at the files change. But if you've been working with another developer on that, but beforehand, you don't have to invest the time to review that PR that you would ahead of time, because it's lower risk, right? It's lower risk of having things that might break because that collaboration has been happening before. So that's a great example. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you ever have anything more to add, I don't have anything more to add for our talk here today. Yeah, thanks so much for your time, Kevin. Appreciate you talking to us here at GitKon, and I look forward to seeing what you and your team are doing and pushing out there in the future.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate the opportunity.
Think of GitKraken Dev as your all-access pass to the GitKraken services that we offer. We created a place online for you and your team members to access things like workspaces, focus view, cloud patches, insights. We wanted to enable the accessibility of all of these services, regardless of whatever tool you may or may not be using or extension you might want to install. Even if you're not using GitKraken tools at all, you can still collaborate and work with your team in this space. For developers using GitKraken Dev, we're building a platform that's going to allow you to connect and manage your Git data across all of the GitKraken products. With this comes the ability to access things like the focus view right from the browser, and you can check the status of the most important items without having to install an application or an extension. Being browser-based will allow you and anyone on your team, regardless of how they choose to work with Git, access to these same features and services that improve the developer experience and your Git workflow. GitKraken.dev is in development as we speak. We're excited for you to dive in, explore, and help us shape its future. We really want this to be a tool that helps optimize the dev experience for you and your team, so please head on over for early access to GitKraken.dev, sign up, and join the waitlist. Thanks.
Welcome back. Want to win some epic GitKon prizes? Well, you can enter for your chance to win games, GitKon swag, and signed items by Shah and Astin by registering on GitKon.com. Up next is a developer turned content creator with an audience of over 900,000 developers worldwide. Passionate about open source software, his goal is to inspire and educate developers through informative and often funny video content. You can find him on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. Here is Louis Menelaws with a creative and beautiful story about the Fellowship of Git.
Hi there, my name is Louis. I'm a programmer and content creator. I run the channels Coding with Louis, which has almost close to 1 million viewers worldwide. Before content creation, I used to run a software development agency called Tomorrow Inc., where we built software for enterprises as well as startups. And a big part of that job was making important technical decisions as well as finding the best way to work with other programmers. I'm very lucky to be in the position I am where I can combine both of my passions into a job. What differentiates a side project from deploying apps at scale is having a team with a common mission, creating great software collaboratively. But if we can't safely deliver this collaborative code to the place it's supposed to be deployed, well, middleware Earth will forever be looked over by downtime. That's why you need to create the Fellowship of Git, a team of superstar software developers with a mission to deliver Git to Mount Cloud and free middleware Earth of the evils of downtime. And with just a simple Git init, the Fellowship of Git is ready to start their journey developing software together and releasing it to all of the land. Our team begins their journey developing the initial framework of their code. They identify how they can use Git in the best way forward and are wary of any potential threats. What are some ways they can reduce conflicts, and how can they make sure our team is focusing on creating value for our users? The Fellowship is looking very optimistic until they see something flying off into the distance: project managers. As they start flying closer and closer, the team hides under the best excuse they can: add it to the backlog. The project managers fly off skeptical, but our heroes are able to continue planning. And so when you start a project with your team, make sure you're always focusing on the end goal. What workflow you want to use, how often you commit, what you commit are all important things to ask you and your team before going on your code journey. Otherwise, you'll spend more time fixing conflicts. The team decided on the best possible route: to code all features on a separate branch independently. It was obviously the quickest route with the least possible feedback from management. So our team works on multiple different branches, but after only a week, this direction begins to crumble immediately. When trying to bring the code into the main branch, merge conflicts happened left and right, bugs due to merge errors, and lost work. What was the real source of truth? This started to break the unity between our heroes. A common way that Git branches causes issues is when they've been active for way too long and contain way too much code to review. So if you have 4 or 5 developers doing this simultaneously, you'll find that source of truth starts conflicting with your branch and errors will happen immediately. After an avalanche of angry emails from management, our heroes knew the correct answer: to Git reset and go into a direction they were not comfortable with. The Fellowship of Git enters a new phase in their development journey, one different from what they've imagined. Before, each team member could venture into what seems like their own code base. Now, everything was about to change. The Fellowship has to code in a much more narrow environment. Using trunk-based development, the team is forced to stay as close to the main branch as possible, while also making really small and frequent changes. This is the only way our developers can get through this phase in their journey. After the catastrophe of their Git reset, not only are they working in tighter conditions, they are being swarmed by bugs to squash left and right. Our team constantly has to branch out, commit, and merge. Constant collaboration and picking up the pieces is the main goal in this phase. And working this way helped our developers by focusing on the code rather than wasting time on their version management system. When you branch out from the main source of truth and have short-lived branches, you rarely run into the issues of merge conflicts. For developers doing a lot of the code reviews, this makes it easier to review code, as it's easier to investigate a pull request that is 50 lines of code versus 2,500 lines of code. As all of them submit their pull requests, the senior developer is tasked with one critical error that must be dealt with. As they look at the code review, the senior says, "You shall not pass," declining the pull request, as everyone has already left. As our heroes recover from the sprint that they previously went through, they meet with senior developers who have deployed many applications before. After doing a code scan, they realize that our heroes were not at all equipped to handle the deployment, forever putting middleware Earth into the powerful evils of downtime. To help our heroes complete their mission of deploying, the senior devs offered tools and knowledge to help them on their journey. Git Stash, a way for our heroes to quickly switch tasks without losing their progress. Git Rebase allows our heroes to untangle and reorder the commit history. Git Bisect, the tool used to find where a bug happened. And a continuous integration system, like automated testing on every commit. Now, there's more than 100 Git subcommands. And although you don't have to know every single one, it's very important to at least understand the fundamental Git subcommands before you decide to work on a project of this scale. But just like our heroes, sometimes you have to learn the hard way in order to understand the value of what a certain tool will provide you. The Fellowship of Git took the time to understand the gifts given by the senior developers and decided to continue on their journey. If our heroes wanted to make leaps in their journey, they would need to use those tools to 10x their productivity. But the senior developers gave them the continuous integration tools to do that. So they set up their repository with these testing and build tools, and almost immediately, they were able to stop manually reviewing code and tiring themselves out. Now they can focus on creating more lines of code in their journey, rather than just running scripts to configure their builds. If you want to improve your developer experience, especially in a team scenario, then finding ways to automate the time needed to not code is the best way to stay in your code editor. Tools like Jenkins, GitHub Actions, or Circle CI lets developers define what their code should do whenever a certain action, like a new pull request or commit, happens. And just like the boat, it allows you to be more productive doing something else while everything else is automated. As our heroes enter a new area, a new workflow needed to be implemented. The Fellowship decided to implement the Git flow method. When implemented, the heroes found that each branch had a guided path that they could visibly move through. Everything was isolated as well, so it was easy for them to know what was a feature and what was a bug fix. To ensure they were on the right path, they also made sure they had release paths. This implementation of Git flow was working well. However, issues came up during this phase. Some of the branches became old, making it hard for them to be merged in. Also, if any of the Fellowship members weren't paying attention, one small step can put them in a huge big pitfall. Git flow is also a very popular way of using Git. And just like the dead marshes, from a top-down view, a very clear methodology and plan can be seen. This also helps implement common things like releases and accommodates for the urgent matters like hotfixes. But it has a steep learning curve, so if you're not willing to learn that with your team, then you're going to run into a lot of headaches. After successfully reaching the end of their sprint using Git flow, they reach the final stretch. They see the point of deployment and are ready to start their journey, but something gets in the way. The gate of manual deployments. Manual testing, no documentation, constant meetings, deploys on Fridays, all guard the deployment. Our heroes after this journey knew this was a death wish. What can our heroes do to avoid this awful path? Insight was another path that showcased a much better outcome, one where our heroes could avoid the threats that stopped them from deploying without the issues. The path of continuous delivery. Sometimes in your software development lifecycle, you're going to run into roadblocks that might seem like you can just easily get through it. As our heroes embark on the treacherous journey through the path of continuous delivery, they find themselves amidst the echoing chambers of staging environments, shadows mirroring the challenges of the live deployments they hope to achieve. This is where code becomes battle ready, subjected to rigorous trials designed to simulate the true conditions of middleware Earth. And after working day and night to climb the challenges of another successful production-ready build, our heroes rest thinking the journey was over until a gigantic bug comes and attacks our heroes by setting off alarms and crashing the staging site. Our heroes fight hard to find where this weakness is on the giant bug that awoke them. Well, a faulty YAML file. The developers fix the formatting, reapply it, and watch the bug fall. A valuable lesson learned: the importance of testing your application in a staging environment. The benefits of different environments, like a testing or a staging environment, is fairly obvious. But allocating time to actually using the software on a staging environment is really essential in your software development lifecycle. Mount Cloud looms ahead, a towering structure radiating an aura of zeros and ones. This is it, the climax of our hero's journey. Every line of code written, every test executed, and every bug squash have all led to this defining moment. Gathering their tools and the wisdom accumulated throughout their journey, our heroes initiate the deployment process. The continuous integration and deployment pipelines pulse with activity, automatically testing, building, and releasing in a choreographed dance of precision. And then with a final command, the code is cast into the fiery chasm of Mount Cloud, merging seamlessly with the infrastructure. The deployment is successful. The software runs flawlessly. The heroes are in relief. Middleware Earth is safe once again, all thanks to the resilience and knowledge of the Fellowship of Git. Our heroes feel the victory and honor of the... Oops, we have to release a hotfix quick. Just like the Fellowship of the Ring, developers today can accomplish anything by establishing Git workflows early, leveraging CI/CD automation, and optimizing team collaboration. In this journey, the heroes use a different Git workflow depending on the scenario that they were in. They also learn tools that better optimize their journey so that they can focus on just the code. And similar to your own team situation, the best Git workflow and CI/CD tools is what fits with your already existing scenario. Maybe that is feature branches, maybe that is Git flow, maybe that's trunk-based development, maybe it's stacking. So with your teams, I heavily encourage what will make all of you work better as a team and how you can stay in your code editor for longer.
Hi, it's Bill Huxley. After last year's GitKon, some people were saying I would never work in developer-oriented media again, but look who's back. I got some jokes for you today. Why did the developer refuse to merge branches? Because one does not simply walk into merge conflicts. All right, here's one. Which hobbit is developers' favorite? Gitwise Gamgee, the loyal repository gardener. This is really just replacing words with, what does Sauron use to version control his evil code? One repository to rule them all. It's really a monorepo though, isn't it? That's the monorepo to rule them all. Why did Frodo fail his Git exam? It's not a thing. He couldn't commit to the journey. He couldn't commit.
Thank you, Lewis. That was amazing. I needed more popcorn. All right, where are all my VS Codes fans at? Asking because this next session is for you. Sarah Lean is a seasoned IT pro with an 18-year journey in the tech world. Currently, Sarah calls Microsoft her professional home, thriving as a Microsoft certified trainer and contributing passionately to the tech community. For those on a quest to understand your code history, here's Sarah Lean with an intro to GitLens for VS Code.
Hi everybody and welcome to my session today. My name is Sarah Lean and I'm from Scotland. I've been in the IT industry for about 18 years now, and over the last 5 or 6 years I've been focusing on cloud deployments and looking at things like infrastructure as code, DevOps, and that's really forced me to learn more Git. And in today's session I want to talk to you more about how you can use the extension GitLens to actually help you with your Git processes and make everything much more efficient. So let's dive in. Now, first of all, what is Git? So Git is a powerful distribution version control system that helps teams track and manage changes to their code base efficiently. It also enables multiple developers to work on a project simultaneously, allowing them to merge their changes seamlessly while preserving a history of all modifications. Git operates by creating snapshots of your project's entire directory tree, enabling you to revert to previous states or explore different branches of development with ease. Git facilitates the creation of branches for parallel development efforts and then allows developers to merge their work back into the main codebase when it's ready. Git is an open source tool and has become the industry standard for version control, used by developers and engineers worldwide for both small-scale projects and large-scale software development. As useful as Git is, it can be quite a tricky tool, and getting your head around the processes of some of the Git functionality can be hard as well. And this is where tools such as GitLens can really help you, whether you're a beginner to Git or an advanced user. GitLens is a Visual Studio Code extension that provides enhanced Git integration directly within your code editor. It offers detailed code annotations, including information about who made each code change, when it was made, and the commit message associated with it. GitLens also allows you to see the blame annotations, so you can quickly identify the author of a specific code line and understand the context of each change that has been made. With GitLens, you can easily time travel through your project's history, viewing previous commits and changes to gain insights into the evolution of your code base. And it also streamlines your code review processes by providing visual representations of code changes, helping teams collaborate more efficiently and understanding the impact of each contribution to the code. So now that we know what Git is and GitLens is, let's take a look at how we actually get started with GitLens through installation and setup. To install GitLens, we first must have Visual Studio Code installed on our machine. If you don't already have that installed, please head over to code.visualstudio.com for more information on how to do that. If you already have Visual Studio Code installed, let's get started. In Visual Studio Code, go to the extensions view by clicking on the square icon on the left sidebar. Or you could use the Ctrl-Shift-X shortcut on Windows or Command-Shift-X on Mac. In the extensions view, type GitLens into the search bar. GitLens should appear as the first result. Click the Install button to install the extension. You may see a Reload button. If you do, click on the Reload button and this will reload Visual Studio Code and enable the extension. But don't worry if you don't see it. Now that you have GitLens installed, let's take a look at the settings you have the ability to configure. To configure GitLens settings, click on the GitLens icon on the left-hand sidebar. Depending on the size of your screen and how many extensions you have installed, you may have to click on the ellipses to see it. A new sidebar will open. If you scroll down, you will see GitLens settings. Click on that. Here you can customize various GitLens settings, such as configure how recent changes are displayed in your code, adjust the appearance and behavior of GitLens code lens annotations, or customize how GitLens displays blame annotations for the current line. There is a lot of descriptions on how to configure the settings and what they do, with examples as well. So take some time to have a read, but you may want to come back to changing some of these settings once you have got used to GitLens. Now down the right hand side, you may have noticed that there is a bunch of links available. These will help you find certain settings and be able to configure them quicker when you do wish to configure them. But that's it. You've successfully installed GitLens in Visual Studio Code and you've had a look at the settings that you're able to configure. Now that we have GitLens installed, let's take a look at how GitLens deals with blame annotations. But first of all, what do we actually mean by blame? So in the context of Git and version control, blame refers to a command and a feature that allows you to determine who last modified each line of code in a particular file and when that modification occurred. This feature helps developers and engineers understand the history and ownership of specific code lines within a file. So let's take a look at that in action within GitLens. So as I said, blame annotations help you understand who last modified a specific line of code and use. If we open a file in our project that's under version control with Git, we can locate a line that we're interested in understanding. If we place our cursor on that line, as we can see, GitLens has displayed a small pop-up annotation next to the line we've selected. The annotation reveals several pieces of information. The author of the last commit that modified this line, the commit message associated with that commit, the date and time of the last modification, and we can click around this annotation to get more information around the commit. We could get the commit hash, we could get additional commit messages, and we can even actually look at that commit or that pull request within GitHub as well. There's lots of things you can click on in this annotation. To close the annotation pop-up, simply click anywhere else outside of it or press the escape key. You can also enable and see the blame details by clicking on the small GitLens icon in the top right hand corner. You now have all the blame annotations on the left hand side of your screen and your code on the right. You can click on a specific line and see what other changes were made as part of that commit. And you also get that small pop-up annotation as well, so you still have access to that information. GitLens' blame annotations are an invaluable tool for tracking changes and understanding the history of your code base. They can help you collaborate effectively with your team and maintain code quality. GitLens offers an exciting feature called time travel that allows you to explore your project's history like a time machine. So let's take a look at that. So if we open a file in our project that's under version control with Git, we can click on the commit graph icon in the bottom of the editor. A panel now opens with a lot of information about the history of our code. At the top, there's a timeline that shows us the commit history of the project we're viewing. As we move along this timeline, dots appear. Those are commits, and if we hover over them, we see how many commits have been made on that date, if any at all. To see more information about these commits, we click on that dot. The commit graph will now reload to that time, and you can start to look at those commits that happened on that date and interact with them. The Git time travel feature is an invaluable tool for understanding how your project has evolved over time, pinpointing when issues were introduced, and even retrieving lost code snippets. Code reviews are something engineers and developers do often. They help to ensure the quality, reliability and maintainability of software code before it is merged into a code base or deployed to production. Code reviews have several key objectives, including error detection, reducing technical debt, team collaboration and enhancing security. So how can and does GitLens help when you're going through a code review? Let's take a look. Let's open a file we want to review, and let's leverage GitLens to make that process easier. We can use GitLens to show who made each change and when. As we saw earlier, we can hover over the place inside the code we want to see more information about, and a pop-up display appears. This gives us features to be able to look at the commits, look at the history of it, and interrogate that a bit more. We also have the ability to turn on a heat map to see where the most changes have been made within the code. We can also turn on the file changes view, which will highlight the latest changes and give us an instant view of where to check. We do this by using the GitLens button in the right hand corner. There are also times when we might want to compare two different commits. To do this, in the GitLens bar, you can find an option called Search and Compare. Using this feature, you can search for a commit by different filters: commit message, author, SHA, file, or changes. So let's search for a file. We click on the Start Search button and a taskbar appears. We will select Search by File and type in readme.md in this case. We now have the results. So we can use the feature called Compare References to look back through the commit history. We click on the button and then select the branch or point in time we want to compare the commits with. Now we can click on one of the search results and we can see what the file used to look like and what it currently looks like, giving us a view of understanding the changes and understanding the history of that file and code base. GitLens adds a dedicated sidebar to Visual Studio Code. If we click on the GitLens icon in the sidebar, we can access a wealth of information. One of the features I like is branches, and it can help you switch between branches, fetch information from the branches, and check if the branch is up to date with the main branch. This can be really helpful when doing code reviews and trying to find that branch to be able to review in the first place. In conclusion, GitLens is a game changer for code reviews. It empowers you to navigate code history, understand changes, and leave feedback. By leveraging GitLens in your code review process, you can become a much more efficient and effective code reviewer. Now that we've taken a look at what GitLens is, let's take a look and think about some best practices and tips we can use for our code and for using GitLens. Make it a habit to use GitLens code annotations to understand who made changes and when. This practice promotes accountability and helps you quickly identify the context of specific code lines. When conducting code reviews, use blame annotations to trace the authorship of each code change and review the associated commit messages. This feature streamlines the review process and enhances your ability to provide meaningful feedback to your colleagues. GitLens also allows you to easily navigate through your project's history. Take advantage of this feature to gain insights into the evolution of your code base. You can identify trends, understand major milestones, and spot patterns in your development process. GitLens provides various customization options to tailor its behaviour to your preference. Make sure you explore the settings to adjust the level of detail displayed in annotations, configure how GitLens integrates with your editor, and set up keyboard shortcuts. GitLens is most effective when integrated into your daily development workflow. Use it not only for reviewing code, but also for tracking your own contributions, troubleshooting issues, and exploring the history of specific files or directory. The more you integrate GitLens into your routine, the more value you'll derive from this powerful tool. Hopefully by following these best practices and tips, you can harness the full potential of GitLens to enhance your version control and code review processes, leading to much more efficient and collaborative software development. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.
Supercharge Git with GitLens, the #1 Git extension for VS Code, trusted by millions of developers. Visualize code authorship at a glance with powerful inline blame and others. View your team's work in progress and understand how it's all related through visualization of branches and commits. With our powerful focus view, you can view all your pull requests and issues in one comprehensive list. Clearly see the history of a file, including when changes were made, how large they were, and who made them. Work with and manage multiple repositories with the ability to convert to and from a VS Code workspace, streamlining your workflow. Use AI tools to automatically generate commit messages and explain commits. A set of powerful views into Git for visualizing, exploring, and managing many aspects of a Git repository. Install GitLens for free today.
We are rounding out day 1 of GitKon 2023 with some awesome stories about a few companies you've probably heard of. If you've ever thought to yourself, those lucky devils at Microsoft, Amazon, and Apple, they probably have it all figured out. Dennis Pilarinos is here to tell you that that ain't always the case. But how does he know that? What does Dennis do? Well, simply put, he helps Unblock dev teams, and he served in leadership positions with each of those companies I just listed. I don't know about you, but I'm ready to learn. Let's take a listen.
Hi, my name is Dennis Pilarinos, and today I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience working at companies like Microsoft, Amazon, and Apple, and share a little bit about how those companies are organized and how that impacts the ability for them to collaborate as a development team, an engineering team. So I thought I would start actually by providing a little bit of background. So just share my screen here, and you can see that these were going to be the stories and lessons for Microsoft, Amazon, BuddyBuild, and Apple. A little bit of background, as I said, on myself. I actually started working at Microsoft in the early 2000s. I was there for about 9 years and worked on a handful of different projects, almost exclusively focused on developer tools. One of the projects I kind of originally started working on for developer tooling was something called the .NET Framework, which is a client-side library that developers could use to write applications. After working on that for a little bit, I thought there was going to be a transition to cloud-based computing. I thought it'd be interesting to kick off a bit of an experiment where we could offer APIs in the cloud that developers could use. At the time, this quote-unquote book-selling company had just started a beta for something called EC2 and S3. And I thought that was pretty interesting and started kind of exploring that space as well. So we went from a single machine plugged into our office and a handful of kind of early adopters. And then, 3 years later, that became something called Azure. So it was fun being part of the kind of founding team that built this service, going from a single machine to geographically distributed data centers around the world and running a large team. Being thought of as the company is like, being told that we're cannibalizing the existing business of Microsoft by destroying their on-premise software for something called the cloud to we're all in on the cloud was a really fun journey. So from there, I went and worked at Amazon, actually, and specifically worked on the Kindle browser. I was working on the Silk web browser, is what it's called. That kind of took advantage of my experience in cloud and my passion for mobile and web and kind of put it together so that I could create this web browser that was actually cloud powered. It is the web browser that still powers the Kindle devices today. And the project that I was specifically working on was the Fire Phone. So Amazon had built a phone very briefly, if you might remember. Some people like to joke that it's probably the most expensive paperweight ever made, but really cool technology and a lot of fun for a product. So while I was there, I thought, I'd spent a lot of time getting experience and exposure to the Android platform and wanted to see how iOS kind of had evolved. I'd used the iOS SDK when it first launched, but wanted to get reacclimated with it and thought it'd be fun to build a kind of a simple application. So people would probably describe me as a relatively impatient person, and I'm a very mediocre developer. And so in the process of building this application, I wanted to unlock a very simple workflow. I wanted to be able to do a Git push and have that immediately kind of appear on my device. And so when we looked for how that was done and talked to a whole bunch of people, it was really, really cumbersome. And so we thought, well, that's an interesting opportunity to create a company around it because it's such a common problem. So we created BuddyBuild, and BuddyBuild was a continuous integration platform and deployment platform that teams from around the world ended up using. We had tens of thousands of companies and hundreds of thousands of developers ended up using BuddyBuild. And this is a small sampling of some of the teams that actually used it. So BuddyBuild went from inception, like, hey, this seems like a really good idea, to acquisition in about 3 years. And that BuddyBuild was acquired by Apple. So Apple was a fascinating place to work. I was there for a couple of years. And while I was at Apple, I basically ended up working on the project that took BuddyBuild, made a core part of the iOS and Apple platform kind of development environment and created something called Xcode Cloud. So Apple developers now can actually build their applications using Apple-hosted CI solutions directly from Xcode. So yeah, that was a little bit of kind of background on the projects that I've worked on. I've been building developer tools for 20 years, worked in a handful of small companies and a handful of big ones. And one of the things I realized is that org structure does impact kind of the ability for developers to collaborate and work together. And so I thought I'd just share a little bit about kind of my thinking on that and kind of my experience. Now, some of this data is a little bit old. Like I said, I worked at Microsoft almost 20 years ago now. And it is, unfair to extrapolate any one experience for an entire company. These companies are large, they have large teams. And so this is just like my experience at a certain point in time for a specific part of the company. But, someone actually thought it would be interesting to try to annotate what these experiences look like. So Manu Cornet, I believe I'm pronouncing his name correctly, is from France. He's a developer there and a cartoonist. And he actually drew this cartoon back, I believe, in 2011. And so what we're going to do is it represents kind of the organizational structure of these companies. And so I thought I'd just double click into and talk a little bit about some of the problems and good things that you experience working at Microsoft, Amazon, and Apple. So let's dig into Microsoft. This is obviously, from 2011, a graphic that generally gets people kind of chuckling. It certainly reflected my time and my experience at Microsoft. You had a bunch of groups that were fairly competitive, and that was actually kind of by design. But over time, and certainly when I talk to folks who work there now, the Microsoft is a lot less competitive, and it is actually a lot more collaborative. And so even back then, one of the problems that you'd end up solving is that you end up working against a whole bunch of different stacks of all kind of Microsoft. And so as a developer, you can imagine if you're working on Microsoft Word and you're implementing a feature, and that feature has a dependency on an API from a framework team. Well, the framework team then has a dependency on the Windows team, and the Windows team has a dependency on kind of the hardware abstraction layer team. These are overly simplified kind of hierarchies, but it gives you a sense for how you might be kind of on top of the stack or anywhere in between, and have a whole bunch of these dependencies. And when something goes wrong, one of the things you're trying to figure out is what caused this issue? Where in the stack has something changed, or how does something work that would cause an issue like this? So that was something that we would kind of run into all the time. Amazon, by comparison, people always ask, what's the biggest difference between Microsoft and Amazon? Well, generally, in my experience, what I found was that if a general technical problem would require 7 people, Microsoft would probably give you 9, and Amazon would probably give you 5. And so Amazon, I think, is well known for this kind of 2 pizza team where you never have more people on a team that 2 pizzas could feed. So when you don't have enough people, or you're under-resourced for the problem that you're trying to solve, what it does is it actually gives you it requires you to be very clear and very focused on the thing that you are going to build. So Amazon is an incredibly customer-obsessed company. That was one of the things I was super impressed with. But as a consequence, they're so focused on getting their products out to their customers that they sometimes actually have very little reuse of technology, because all they're focused on is getting the product out. So as a result, how to do something or how something might be done is not something that's super easily found out. And so what you do is how should we do this is something that you would see repeated kind of across all these, leaf nodes, as it were, in this diagram. Let's transition to Apple. Apple was interesting. When I think about my experience there, I really think about almost the dimension of the tenure of the people there. So it was a pretty lumpy, I think, distribution of people in terms of how long they'd worked at Apple. So you're either working there for 1 to 2 years or 10 years plus. And so even at 10 years, you're still kind of considered the new person to the team. For an example, most of my peers had been there for about 20 years. So they'd all worked together across various organizations and groups. And as a consequence of that, they had a lot of tribal knowledge. They knew who knew what parts of the system well over 20 plus years of working together. So when you have that in conjunction with a company that is very kind of isolated and segregated in terms of who knows what information, it becomes kind of this tribal knowledge where one of the hardest parts that you try to figure out is who should I talk to about solving a specific problem? Who are the domain experts for any kind of part of the system, because it is so kind of isolated. So one of the things that we kind of recognize is that, there's obviously pros and cons to every one of these kind of organizational structures and the impact that it has on the organization. And honestly, it's really hard to argue with the results of these companies, right? These are all some of the most valuable, kind of prolific companies. that exist right now, maybe in history even. And so they've all figured out a way to make it work for their business, but they all do have kind of this inefficiency or this problem, right? So it's actually really hard to get the information that you need as a developer, irrespective of which kind of how you organize yourselves. But it's hard to get the information you need about like the application or code base or project that you're working on. So like the what, how, and who are problems that you're running into no matter kind of where you are. And, you know, one of the things that I kind of recognize is that the way that people solve this problem is this, right? When they're trying to figure out any of these specifics on their code base, what they'll do is they will, if you're, physically co-located, they kind of do the drive-by is what we kind of, people typically talk about it. It's a tap on the shoulder, and it's asking someone a question, hey, do you have a minute? And so that helps you get an answer pretty quickly, but it can be pretty costly for the person who's getting that question, because they might be in the middle of something that requires a huge amount of concentration. And so, of course, we're happy to help our coworkers and kind of provide, any help that we can to answer their question. But this is kind of what happens if you're in a distributed or in a co-located space. Most teams now have some component of a distributed nature. And so what ends up happening is you spend a lot of time in kind of these like meetings. Here's an example of an architecture review that I have to attend to in 5 minutes. Or you get a lot of like kind of Slack interruptions being like, hey, do you have a minute? Which again has that same effect of like getting this interruption. So, there's two parts to that equation. One is the person trying to get the information and the latency that they might feel, especially if they're geographically distributed. The other is on the receiving end, having to answer that question and put aside the thoughts that you might have. And I think the only thing that kind of makes that worse is if you have to like answer the same question repeatedly. So the second or third or fourth time that you answer that question, it actually becomes quite painful. And, we saw that no matter which of these companies that you worked at. So a lot of that motivated motivated Unblocked, and specifically this new project that we kicked off just earlier this month, that we've launched, I should say. We've been working on it for a little bit, which is really to help developers get the information that they need so they can avoid those meetings or those interruptions or like digging through documentation, but get the information that they need very, very quickly. And that information is kind of specific to their code base. So the thesis is that like a lot of this information actually exists within the organization itself. And what we're trying to do is surface it no matter where you are so you can get it and kind of move on with your job. So let me show you kind of quickly how that works. I'm going to jump into our web browser, and you can see the kind of Unblock dashboard here. But really our kind of core experiences through this Mac app. So we have this little application here where I can ask a question. So I'm going to ask a question that's actually very specific to the Unblocked code base. So we have this component. It's a very important part of our system architecture. It's called the source mark system. And there's an engine that sits inside it. So what I'm asking is like, how does the source mark engine work? And if you were to ask kind of a general purpose LLM, it would have really no idea. And so it doesn't know anything about my application. But because I'm using Unblocked and it has connections to all these different systems, it is aware of my system. And so it'll tell me, the answer for how the source mark engine works. It'll also show me like where to actually go and look. Here's the text file. If there's any like relevant pull requests, it would show those as well. And again, in that scenario where if I'm working in a large organization, I might actually want to loop in an expert or find out who to talk to about this question. So Unblocked also says the best people to talk to, which is very helpful kind of in a bigger company. Let's just quickly jump into how that looks in VS Code. So we have a VS Code and IntelliJ experience here. And I'm going to open up sourcemarkengine.ts. Now, that's one of many files that make up that source mark system. You can see those all here. But if I open up this insights panel, what I can see is the question that I just asked. So, about a minute ago, I asked, how does the source mark engine work? And it provides the answer and it shows me the reference there. If I open up any of the files that have to do with the source mark system, I'll see that file or that question is associated with that file as well. So one of the things that Unblock can do is like associate questions to your system architecture, to the relevant source code files for your system architecture. So as you're working in those files, you can see conversations that could be potentially helpful to you, or previous answers or previous questions that are helpful to you. We do that also by ingesting actually all the pull requests that might have ever been applied and surfacing all those conversations as well. So here's like a little visual indicator of a pull request that was opened a while ago. And I can see that Matt and Richie had a conversation around the specific line of code. So the idea here is that like I can serendipitously kind of discover information that's helpful for me as I'm navigating the code base. Now, I might actually just be interested in like, asking a question around how a specific function works. So I can say, what does getInstance do? So I can ask questions directly from the IDE as well. And so in a second here, Unblock will provide a response that's specific to the source code file that I'm looking at. So if I have any questions around how something works or why it was done a specific way, I can ask Unblock and it'll show it to me directly here. It says, hey, the instance is part of this class. So it is contextually aware around the things that I'm specifically asking. Let's quickly take a look at another place that you might be working, right? Let's go into Slack. And I'm going to actually jump into our engineering channel. This is the actual engineering channel for our team. And I'm going to ask Unblocked a question. I'm going to say, how does this, actually, you know what, let's ask a different one. I'm going to ask it, what are the user engagement metrics? So something's very specific to our source code system. What are the user engagement metrics and how do they work? So I can send Unblocked a message directly from Slack. And you'll see that Unblocked actually recognizes that question and it's actually going to provide an answer. So no matter where I am, I can get the information that I need about my code base and about my application, be it on the web, through the IDE, or in Slack itself. So here are all those questions there. So that's just a quick overview of how we think that developers can benefit from our product to help answer these questions. So instead of interrupting or having to wait for a response, you get quick responses that are specific to your application. So you get unblocked and kind of move on with your day. Each of those questions is then discoverable by other members of the team. So hopefully you're helping other members of the team get unblocked as well. So that's just a quick overview of some of the experiences that I had at these various companies, seeing kind of systemic problems that were consistent across them, and a little bit of how we're thinking about kind of solving it. We've had a number of teams kind of participate in our early kind of adopter process and found a lot of value and utility in getting these answers very, very quickly for themselves. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm happy to answer questions. Would love to connect with folks if they have thoughts around this problem. Thanks so much for your time.
It's pretty validating to hear that all teams and companies, even the big ones, experience similar challenges to perhaps the ones you might have seen, right? So let's give a virtual hand to Dennis for closing out our day one agenda. I hope you learned a thing or two that can help smooth out your own development workflow. And today was just the beginning. We have many more exceptional talks and speakers in the days ahead. Be sure to tune in tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pacific time, where we'll kick things off with our second keynote, Justin Cormack, Chief Technology Officer at Docker. Today's sessions will continue to stream for the next several hours. So if you saw something a colleague or friend might like or enjoy, please let them know to tune into the stream. And I've been your host, Jonathan Silva, and we'll see you tomorrow.
That was unbelievable. The music industry, keep the funk in their music. That was unbelievable. The music industry, keep the funk in their music.